Chapter 607. The auction of the Medicine King tripod soon began. To Li Yundong's surprise, although the Medicine King tripod was an antique cultural relic found in Huangshan City, Anhui Province, the auction was held in Dongwu City. Go to see. In order to hold this grand auction, Tianai Auction House gave up its own company's auction venue and set up the auction venue in a 5-star hotel in Dongwu City. Li Yundong took Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin to Dongwu City again. Women were a man's best business cards. Most of the time, on certain occasions, the success of a man depended on what kind of women he had with him. In today's China, where the luxury market was constantly heating up, most of the time an auction held by an auction house was not only a grand event for auction lovers, but also a place for rich people and big shots to spend a lot of money and compete for beauty. In this kind of place, beautiful women were naturally indispensable. As soon as he arrived at the entrance of the hotel, Li Yundong saw all kinds of famous luxury cars appearing at the entrance of the hotel in an endless stream. Luxurious and noble businessmen and beautiful women got out of them one after another. These beautiful women wore jeweled necklaces around their necks and huge gem earrings in their ears. Each of them was rich and enchanting, attracting the attention of many people. But when Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin arrived, everyone's eyes were immediately attracted by the three of them. Su Chan was wearing a fiery red classical dress. The hem of the dress was piled up on the ground like a cloud, like a bright cloud of fire. As soon as the little girl moved, it seemed that there was a cloud following her. She was wearing a fur shawl on her shoulders, and her whole person looked noble, enchanting, and beautiful. Ziyuan was still wearing a rather ordinary snow-white dress. However, even though she was wearing such an ordinary dress, it made people feel as if she was wearing a seamless heavenly robe. Every inch of her clothes seemed to come from the clouds in the sky. She was like a fairy who had fallen from the clouds to the mortal world. Her entire body did not carry a trace of the mortal world's aura. Zhou Qin was wearing a purple cheongsam. She was calm and elegant by nature, and she came from a rich family. Her every move revealed a unique aura of a superior. Her beautiful eyes revealed a cold and arrogant aura of disdain for all living beings. Only when her eyes fell on Li Yundong did her eyes become extremely soft and full of admiration. As soon as Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin appeared, they immediately captured the brilliance of almost all the beauties in the venue. For a moment, everyone present stared at them with their eyes wide open, as if they couldn't believe that there could be three such stunning beauties in the world at the same time. Moreover, Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin each had their own beauty and temperament. These men looked at Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin greedily and enviously. They couldn't help sighing in their hearts. What kind of man is worthy of such a woman? While they were sighing with emotion, they saw Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin surrounded by a young boy. This boy was wearing a hand-sewn dark red tang suit and a pair of black cloth shoes. His eyes were soft and there seemed to be a smile at the corner of his mouth. When he looked around, his expression was indifferent, as if he had seen all the vicissitudes of the world. He was not old, but he gave people a sense of maturity which made people marvel. This boy was Li Yundong. He looked at Su Chan with a smile and said, "Chaner, do you remember the first time we came to the hotel?" Su Chan turned her head to look at him and said with a smile, "I remember. I was so nervous that I didn't know where to put my hands." Li Yundong smiled and said with some emotion, "Yes, it feels like many years have passed. But in fact, less than half a year has passed." She stealthily tugged at his hand and playfully hooked her finger around his palm. Then she gave him a sweet smile. Although Zhou Qin often went to various places of the upper class, this was the first time she had participated in such a special auction. She looked around curiously and couldn't help sighing. There are so many people. Are they all here to participate in the auction? Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "There are many acquaintances." Li Yundong took a look and saw that there were indeed many cultivators from the cultivation sects that he had seen at the Taoist assembly. Among them, Zhang Kongyun, Zhang Lufang, Zhang Ling, Zhou Ping, and others of the Jingyi school were mixed in. However, this time they were not wearing Taoist robes. Instead, they were wearing neat suits or silk cheongsams with tassels like luster. Even Zhang Kongyun, who didn't care about his image, was wearing a gray tang suit. He was playing with a folding ink fan in one hand and looking at the ink painting on the fan alone. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling also saw Li Yundong. The two of them snorted and quickly turned their faces away, showing great hostility. At this time, Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, where's Jinrendu? Why hasn't he come yet?" Li Yundong looked around and didn't see anyone from the Chuanjin dragon sect. Instead, he found that several cultivators from the Qingqing sect were glaring at him, as if they wanted to tear him into pieces in the next second. These guys, why do they seem to have a deep hatred for me? Li Yundong felt strange, but he didn't take it seriously. Just as he was looking back and forth, there was another exclamation behind him. Li Yundong looked back and saw a woman in a red dress with black hair and a blonde girl in a formal suit walking into the hotel lobby. These two women were Ao Wushuang and Chris. Although she was wearing the same long red dress as Su Chan, her long dress gave people a mature and beautiful feeling, unlike Su Chan's, which exuded a pure and pleasant aura of a young girl. Chris' suit perfectly outlined her sexy figure and amazing exquisite curves. When Li Yundong saw the two of them, he immediately smiled and said, "You're here?" Because Ao Wushuang and Chris had also invested in the auction, Li Yundong had specially invited them to come with him. However, Chris didn't know how to fly, so Ao Wushuang took her all the way here, while Li Yundong took Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin to go first. It was obvious that Chris was not used to this kind of high-altitude flight. Her originally very white skin looked even paler at this time. Her legs were trembling a little. She forced a smile at Li Yundong and said, "Can I take a plane next time?" Su Chan burst into laughter and said, "You want to learn cultivation with this kind of person? This is the first time I've heard of someone who can fly but wants to take a plane." Chris bit her lip and didn't say anything more. Li Yundong also helped her out with a smile and said, "Let's go. Let's go into the auction house." Under everyone's gaze, they arrived at the auction house on the 19th floor. As soon as they entered, Li Yundong found that there were already many people sitting there, including many disciples of Buddhist sections. Compared with some cultivators of Taoist sects, these monks were much more generous. Most of them were wearing yellow monk robes, and their bald heads were particularly eye-catching in the crowd. Zhou Qin took a careful look at the scene. She suddenly whispered to Li Yundong, "Master, people from the Shaolin Temple are also here." Li Yundong asked curiously, "People from the Shaolin Temple are also here? Are they also interested in the Medicine King tripod? It can't be, right?" Zhou Qin shook her head. "I don't know about that. I don't know if they are here for the Medicine King tripod." Chris, who knew a lot about China, asked curiously, "Shaolin Temple? Is the Shaolin Temple also a cultivation sect? Isn't this place for practicing martial arts?" Zhou Qin laughed and said, "It's hard for me to explain this to you, but Master knows. Let him tell you." Li Yundong was also looking around. As he looked, he said, "The Shaolin Temple is the same as Wudong Mountain. It is both a martial arts sect and a cultivation sect. Although in martial arts, one belongs to the external sect and the other belongs to the internal sect. But in the cultivation world, the direction of cultivation of the two is quite similar, and they both belong to the Dongwu sect." "Dongwu sect?" Chris asked with a confused look on her face. Li Yundong explained with a smile, "Well, it's a cultivation sect that uses alchemy to enter the Tao and martial arts. They don't have much need for and dependence on powerful magical weapons. Their main means of fighting are fighting moves supported by Jinqi of Naiden." When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Master, if you have a powerful magical weapon but don't use it, won't you suffer a big loss in a fight?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. "That's not necessarily true. Zhang Sanfeng was a great master of the Danwu sect. Have you ever heard of him losing in a fight? The fighting methods of the Danwu sect are extremely fierce and flexible. Moreover, they have a unique secret method that can resist magic and powerful magical weapons. They can't be underestimated. If you look down on them, you'll be the one to suffer." Zhou Qin said with a worried expression, "Then won't we have another strong opponent in this auction? The Shaolin Temple is very rich." At this time Ziyuan laughed. "That's not necessarily true. They may not be here to rob the Medicine King tripod." Ao Wushuang, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, "In fact, we don't have to snatch the Medicine King tripod. As long as we can ensure that the Medicine King tripod is not taken away by the enemy, it will be fine. If it doesn't work, we can cooperate with Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect. We can disturb the mood and judgment of the bidders and let Du Fei ambush in the dark." Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "Senior Ao Wushuang is right." They were sitting in a corner of the auction house and talking in a low voice. At this time there were more and more people in the auction house, and many people sat in their seats one after another. Li Yundong and Ziyuan had been staring at the bidders who had come in, secretly calculating the cultivation sects present. When the 13th cultivation sect appeared, Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect finally appeared in the field with Wei Qin. Du Fei looked around at the door. After meeting Li Yundong's eyes, An imperceptible smile quickly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then he quietly sat in another corner with Wei Qing far away from Li Yundong. When Li Yundong and the others saw Du Fei appear, they all breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. The little girl patted her chest and said very sweetly, "Fortunately, Jinren Du didn't stand us up." Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak, but his eyes inadvertently swept to the door and he was surprised to see that Shen Wankai had also appeared on the spot. Li Yundong said in surprise, "Shen Wankai? He's here too?" His exclamation made Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, Ao Wushuang, and Chris all look at Shen Wankai curiously. Ao Wushuang only took a glance at him and then withdrew her gaze indifferently. She didn't take this rich man seriously at all. Chris didn't know the origin of this old man, so she just looked at him blankly and then withdrew her gaze. Ziyuan and Su Chan were puzzled, as if they didn't understand why Shen Wankai had come to get involved in this mess. Only Zhou Qin laughed and said, "Master, Shen Wankai is a very cultured person. Think about it, last time he participated in the tea culture and art challenge, why can't he participate in this kind of antique auction? He is very rich. He is a VIP client of major auction houses and is also a well-known domestic antique speculator." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I see. I understand." Su Chan looked at Shen Wankai and suddenly said with some excitement, "Yundong, if Mr. Shen can help us buy the Medicine King tripod, that would be great." Li Yundong didn't say anything but just smiled. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't speak, Su Chan was anxious to persuade him, but as soon as she opened her mouth, she saw two more people coming in from the door. As soon as Ao Wushuang saw these two people, her face immediately darkened. Her whole body seemed to be emitting a bone-chilling aura, and she said in a cold voice, "Why are they here?" Li Yundong looked at the two of them and asked curiously, "Who are they?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Saionji Tsunakatsu and Tuki of Jinyan Tantrism are the two Japanese people I told you about before." Li Yundong suddenly frowned and looked at the two Japanese with flickering eyes. He saw that the two Japanese had sharp eyes and looked down at the crowd with arrogant expressions. There was a firm momentum between their eyebrows that was determined to win. He murmured in a low voice, "They don't come with good intentions." Chapter 608. Although the arrival of Saionji Tsunakatsu did not make the other bidders feel a trace of vigilance, Li Yundong subconsciously had an ominous premonition. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Book_bar. He seemed to have vaguely predicted something, but these things were only vague and hazy in the depths of his mind. As for what it was exactly, he couldn't quite put his finger on it. These two guys. Are they here for the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong frowned and said in a deep voice. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Is there anything else that attracted them here?" Su Chan asked curiously, "How did they know?" Ziyuan looked at Saionji Tsunakatsu and Tuki warily. She said softly, "Maybe they learned about it from the news. The Medicine King tripod is a famous powerful magical weapon in the cultivation world. It's normal for the Japanese to be jealous and want to take it for themselves." Zhou Qin and Su Chan said angrily at the same time, "Damn it." Zhou Qin said angrily, "Can't these Japanese do something good?" Su Chan also said angrily, "How can the national treasure fall into the hands of the Japanese? Yundong, you must." While the little girl was talking, she suddenly saw a hand reach out from behind her. A surprised voice said, "Hello, Miss Su Chan, I see you again." Su Chan was stunned for a moment. She looked at the hand that was reaching out from beside her and couldn't help looking back. She saw a middle-aged man smiling at her with a face full of surprise. Su Chan felt that this person was very familiar. It seemed that she had seen him somewhere before, but she couldn't remember for a while. At this time, Li Yundong also turned his head and saw that the middle-aged man in front of him was Rong Guofa, who had tried to buy Su Chan with money at the gate of the amusement park. Su Chan didn't take Rong Guofa to heart, but Li Yundong remembered him unforgettably. He was stunned for a moment. At this time Rong Guofa also looked at him. They were stunned at the same time and blurted out, "It's you?" If it had been in the past, Li Yundong might have taken the initiative to go forward and humiliate Rong Guofa, but Li Yundong was no longer the young boy he used to be. He just smiled slightly, nodded to Rong Guofa and said meaningfully, "The world is really small." As soon as Rong Guofa saw Li Yundong, he remembered what Su Chan had once said to him. "You must remember his name. His name is Li Yundong and he is my partner. Although he is just a nobody now, I promise you that in less than 2 years, his name will shake the world. At that time what you can do, he can do it effortlessly, but what he can do, you can never do." This Li Yundong? Had he made a name for himself? Rong Guofa looked Li Yundong up and down, but there was nothing special about the clothes he was wearing. However, the women around him were really beautiful. Each of them was a stunning beauty and their temperaments and appearances were different. For a moment Rong Guofa was dazzled. Seeing Li Yundong greet him politely, Rong Guofa nodded at him in a reserved manner and smiled, but in his heart he thought, this poor boy is really good. I really don't know what's so great about him. Rong Guofa hadn't expected to meet Su Chan again. He even ignored the fact that he had a female companion beside him and took the initiative to say to Su Chan, Miss Su Chan, I didn't expect to see you here again. It's really a small world. At this time Su Chan also remembered who Rong Guofa was. She looked at him with some disgust in her eyes, snorted and said, yes, this world is really small. Rong Guofa was delighted and said with a smile, yes, it's really fate. Su Chan saw that Rong Guofa was actually taking advantage of the situation and climbing up to her. She made a face at Rong Guofa and said, next time you go somewhere, you must tell me in advance. When Rong Guofa heard this, he was so happy that his bones became a few pounds lighter. He said with a face full of ecstasy, okay, next time I want to go out, I will definitely inform you first. As he spoke, he didn't forget to look at Li Yundong, his eyes full of provocation and pride. Su Chan said seriously, yes, I know where you are going, so I definitely won't go there. In case I run into you. Rong Guofa's smile suddenly froze, and Chris and Zhou Qin couldn't help but burst out laughing. Li Yundong also couldn't help but pat Su Chan on the shoulder and say with a smile, well, stop it. Sit down, the auction is about to start. Rong Guofa's girlfriend next to him couldn't stand it anymore. She secretly pinched Rong Guofa's arm and said in a low voice, do you think I'm dead? Rong Guofa smiled awkwardly at her. He finally sat back in his seat and stopped pestering Su Chan, but his eyes kept rolling back and forth between Li Yundong and Su Chan, as if he was calculating something in his heart. Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others chatted in low voices. After about 10 minutes, the auction, which had almost shocked the entire cultivation world, finally officially began. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan made a private calculation. There were as many as 23 cultivation sects present at the auction this time. The scale was so large that it even far exceeded that of the Taoist assembly. After the host enthusiastically explained the rules of the auction and introduced the items, the first item was displayed on the stand. Li Yundong took a look and saw that there was an exquisite ivory pagoda on the exhibition stand. Although he looked at it from a distance, he could still see that the pagoda was shining with a crystal luster. Obviously it was not an ordinary item. Soon, the host invited the bidders who wanted to identify and see such an item up close to the stage. Li Yundong saw that many people on the stage had left their seats and walked over to the ivory tower to take a closer look. There were many cultivators from cultivation sects among them. Although Li Yundong had read all the classics in the spirit space, he was the first girl in an auction like this. He asked Zhou Qin curiously, what is this for? Zhou Qin explained to Li Yundong in a low voice, before every item is auctioned, according to the rules, the bidders will be invited to go up and observe it to make sure that it is genuine and whether it is damaged or not. Only then did Li Yundong understand, but he looked at Du Fei who had pulled Wei Qing up to observe it, and asked curiously, does Jinren Du also want to buy this ivory tower? Why would he go up to see it? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, I don't know. Maybe he likes to collect it? Su Chan, who was standing to one side, asked curiously in a low voice, isn't he afraid that he won't have enough money to bid for the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong thought for a moment and shook his head. I don't know. Maybe he has plenty of money or maybe he has other plans. Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on the cultivators of the various sects who were watching the auction. Her face was thoughtful, as if she was thinking about something. He couldn't help but ask, Zi Yuan, what are you thinking? Zi Yuan came to her senses. She hesitated for a moment and said, logically speaking, the information of these items should have been sent to every bidder long ago. We also have them. Moreover, if they are really interested in the items, most of the bidders will go to the auction house in private to see and inspect the goods in private. Therefore, this procedure is actually for those who have no intention of bidding. Many people are just going through the motions. Even if they have seen it before, they just want to go up and see if it has been replaced. Although, for the sake of their own reputation, the auction house is unlikely to do such a thing. Li Yundong asked curiously, what do you want to say? Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, since most of us are here for the Medicine King tripod, we definitely won't waste money on these items, so there's no need to look at them because we definitely won't buy them. But, why would these cultivators go to see them? Li Yundong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, I don't know. Maybe, they want to kill the rabbit and then collect a basket of grass? And collect a few cultural relics by the way? Ziyuan couldn't help laughing and shook her head. She said in a low voice, Li Yundong, think about it. If you and a sect are fighting fiercely in the auction, and a third party suddenly appears, what will you do? Li Yundong was stunned. You mean, there may also be cultivation sects secretly joining forces? Ziyuan nodded and said, generally speaking, a bidder will have two psychological bottom lines. The first is the psychological bottom line determined by the liquidity he has at hand. When the price of the auction exceeds the upper limit of the liquidity he can gather in a short period of time, his heart will be seriously shaken and he will begin to reconsider whether to continue bidding. Ziyuan looked at the auctioneer on the stage and said in a low voice, according to the Scottish auction rules of this auction, once the auctioneer calls the hammer 3 times and the bidder has not decided, then no matter how much money he has, he won't be able to buy such goods. At that time, it will be too late for him to regret it. Zhou Qin was also listening carefully. At this time she also interrupted, yes, so bidding is not only about burning money to compete for wealth, but also a kind of competition of courage and intelligence. Sometimes, some bidders will even place shills in the auction house to cooperate with their bidding in order to win. Li Yundong asked curiously, how? Ziyuan said with a smile, didn't I just say that a careful bidder will usually have two bottom lines in his heart? The first is the upper limit of the liquidity in his hands. If this bottom line is exceeded, it may bring liquidity difficulties to his business and company. Therefore at this time he will hesitate for a moment. However, because many buyers will choose to pay off the money in installments after the auction is successful, the first psychological bottom line will give them a relatively minor blow. As long as they quickly calculate the distribution of their liquidity and the distribution of the payment funds, they can quickly make a judgment, to chase the price or to give up. Li Yundong listened attentively and said, what about the second psychological bottom line? Ziyuan continued to speak with confidence and assurance. The second psychological bottom line is relatively vague, but generally if the actual value of the auction item is far lower than the auction price, then the second psychological bottom line will be broken. In addition, if the auction price far exceeds the financial limit of the bidder, then this psychological bottom line will also be broken. And the limit of this financial limit varies from person to person. Some businessmen are strong. Even if they bid for a sky-high price, they can still turn over the money if they choose to pay in installments. Li Yundong was a little confused. He asked, but what does the second psychological bottom line you mentioned have to do with the alliance between the sects and the placement of shills? At this time Zhou Qin laughed. She said softly, Master, you don't know this. Sometimes the bidding is decided in an instant, so there is not much space and time left for people to think. Think about it, if I arrange someone to secretly attack you and you call out a price, he immediately calls out the price that is the first bottom line in your heart. What will you think at that time? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Then I will definitely be stunned subconsciously and then turn my head to see who is bidding. Zhou Qin laughed and said, that's right. At this time, if I personally call out a price and then instantly call out the price that is the second bottom line in your heart, what will you think? Li Yundong suddenly understood. I understand. Ordinary people generally can't accept such a huge price fluctuation in an instant, so they will be greatly shocked, become afraid of fighting and then choose to give up. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with admiration. That's right. Moreover, this method of bidding is very secretive, and it's not easy to offend people. Because the party who gives up usually hates the most is not the person who bid the last price and won the item, but the person who messed up the bidding in the beginning. At this time Ziyuan also laughed. Well, in fact, this is a bit like a tactical method in long-distance running. At the beginning you will target the strongest person on the enemy's side and arrange an opponent to drag you down and constantly consume your physical strength. The other contestant will follow you at a moderate pace until the opponent is almost exhausted by his companions. Then he will suddenly exert his strength, suddenly overtake him and then leave. Li Yundong looked at the cultivators of the other sects with a strange expression and whispered, did they also arrange shills? Ziyuan smiled and said, can we join hands with the Chuanjin Dragon sect? Why can't they join hands with each other? The most important thing is, all of us hope to exhaust the enemy, but no one is willing to make the first move, because this kind of bidding is like beating drums and passing flowers. Everyone wants this flower to fall into the hands of others at the beginning and consume their funds. But the problem is, because they are not sure who is the secret shill, they definitely don't dare to make a move easily. Otherwise, if they bid a price, no one will bid again. They will be forced to buy it and spend a round of money, which will be a big loss. Or if they bid a few times, it will be bought by those who really want to buy the item. Then it will be meaningless. Li Yundong nodded to himself. He thought for a moment and said, it would be great if we could mess up the situation and let these guys consume each other in confusion. Zhou Qin smiled and said, it's not that easy. They are not fools. They won't make a move until they are sure of their identities. Su Chan, who had been listening to the conversation between Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin, suddenly had an idea. She quickly glanced at Rong Guofa behind her, as if she had come up with some wicked idea. Her eyes suddenly rolled around and she whispered a few words to Zhou Qin, who was beside her. Zhou Qin was stunned. At first, her face was full of suspicion, but the more she listened, the brighter her eyes became. She couldn't help but glance at Rong Guofa behind her. After listening to Su Chan's words, she gave Su Chan a thumbs up with great admiration and nodded slightly. After getting Zhou Qin's approval, Su Chan immediately laughed, and her eyes narrowed into slits. She shook her head and thought proudly, I just had a brainwave and came up with a good idea that will shock the world and make the gods weep. I'll make the auction a mess so that we can fish in troubled waters. Chapter 609. Soon all the bidders who had gone to the stage to watch the auction had finished and returned to their seats. Go to the internet. Li Yundong saw these people going up and down, coming and going. Those who went up to the stage to watch were not necessarily interested in buying, while those who looked around below the stage were not necessarily unwilling to buy. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile and whispered to Zi Yuan, I wonder what will happen later? Zi Yuan smiled and said, we'll know soon. At this time, Su Chan came over and looked at the ivory Arhat tower with envy. She whispered to Li Yundong, Yundong, this ivory tower is so beautiful. If it were placed in our house it would be very beautiful. Although Su Chan's voice was quite low, it was just enough for Rong Guogua to hear. When Rong Guogua heard this, his heart skipped a beat and he was secretly delighted. Miss Su Chan likes this kind of ivory tower. Then I'll bid for it and give it to her later. I can win the favor of the beauty and defeat this guy's arrogance. It's killing two birds with one stone. Why not? For Rong Guogua, he always believed in one sentence. Men don't care about loyalty. Loyalty is because the weight of betrayal is too low. Women don't care about loyalty. Loyalty is because they are not tempted enough. As long as he showed enough sincerity and temptation, he believed that he would be able to get the beauty in his arms in the end. Could it be that he couldn't defeat a young boy? Even if this guy was outstanding now, could he surpass him in half a year's time? Rong Guogua thought disdainfully in his heart. Li Yundong didn't know what Rong Guogua was thinking. He looked at Su Chan curiously and seemed a little puzzled. According to his understanding of the little girl, she had never been a person who liked luxury. Although she had a fanatical love for food and clothes, she had never shown any interest in these antiques. Li Yundong was about to ask Su Chan, but he saw that she was secretly winking at him. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the little girl must be up to something, but as for what it was, he couldn't think of it for the time being, so he nodded cooperatively and said with a smile, You like it? Well, I'll buy it for you later. Ronggua, who was behind him, sneered when he heard this. He crossed his arms and leaned back, looking like a mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Li Yundong paid attention to the starting price of the ivory Arhat's mansion guarding pagoda and the minimum price increase each time. He asked curiously, 100,000? It doesn't seem very expensive? Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said exaggeratedly, Isn't 100,000 expensive? In the past, we couldn't even get 10,000 yuan. Li Yundong laughed. With the help of Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Chris and Ao Wushuang, he had raised nearly 50 million yuan. This amount of money was not a lot, but it was not a small amount either. Zi Yuan was also confused and said in confusion, I don't know. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Could it be that they are trying to consume each other? Li Yundong said curiously, Aren't they afraid that they will buy this thing in the end and be consumed? But just as they were feeling strange, they saw the atmosphere on the scene suddenly become white-hot. The cultivation sects who had been watching on the stage raised their signs one after another to increase the price. In just a short while, the price had been raised to 200,000 yuan. Seeing that the first item was being auctioned so smoothly, the atmosphere suddenly became hot, and his own emotions also became excited. He couldn't help but shout, 200,000 yuan, is there any higher price than this? 200,000 yuan once? 210,000 yuan, someone raised the price by 10,000 yuan at once. 210,000 yuan, is there any higher price than 210,000 yuan? Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others were all dumbfounded at this time. They looked at each other as if they didn't understand what these cultivation sects were doing at all. Li Yundong said with a strange expression, "Are they all crazy? Why are they fighting for this thing?" Ziyuan frowned and stared at the ivory Arhat tower. She didn't say a word, as if she was thinking about something quickly. Zhou Qin thought for a while, then said in a low voice, "Master, shall we raise the sign?" Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's arm excitedly and said, Okay, I'll raise it." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Why are you so excited?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, "It's fun. With so many people raising their signs to bid together, it's so fun and lively." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then you can play, but be careful not to get yourself into trouble later." Su Chan's eyes narrowed into a line as she smiled. She was as proud as a fox that had done something bad. She moved closer to Li Yundong's ear and whispered, don't worry, I promise I will only set fire to people, not to myself." After that she jumped up, quickly raised the sign and shouted, 1 million. There was an uproar in the room, and the auctioneer suddenly became excited. Some ordinary businessmen who wanted to buy such a bidding item were stunned by Su Chan's words. Many of them sincerely wanted to buy this ivory Arhat tower, but they were confused by the previous bidding behavior of the various sections. They didn't know whether they really wanted to buy it or just wanted to raise the price. But at this time, Su Chan directly raised the price from 210,000 to 1 million. These businessmen suddenly went crazy. How could there be such a random bidding? Did they know how to bid? Had they ever bid? These businessmen were so angry that they almost wanted to hit the table, but when they turned their heads, they saw an extremely beautiful girl standing there with a sweet smile. Their anger suddenly dissipated a lot. Li Yundong was also shocked by Su Chan's bid. He quickly pulled Su Chan down and said in a low voice, "Hey, are you crazy? 1 million to buy such a thing? If no one raises the price later, what will you do?" Su Chan smiled and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, someone will definitely raise the price." As soon as Su Chan's voice fell, she saw the monk of the Shaolin Temple raise the sign again. The host immediately shouted, 1,002,000, is there any higher bid? 1,002,000 going once. Li Yundong was really stunned at this time. He turned to look at Su Chan and asked curiously, "How do you know that these big monks will raise the sign and bid?" Su Chan also said with a blank face, "I don't know, Before Su Chan could finish her words, a new round of bidding immediately set off in the room. To Li Yundong's great surprise, it was still the cultivation sects who raised the price. What are these guys doing? Li Yundong was dumbfounded, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Why aren't any serious businessmen raising the price? Instead, it's a group of drunkards who are randomly raising the price? At this time, Ziyuan's expression changed. She said with a stern expression, "Li Yundong, you are proficient in all Buddhist magical items. Why don't you use your Jinchi to test this ivory Arhat tower in private and see if there is any reaction?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Soon, he controlled his Jinchi to extend along the ground like invisible tentacles toward the ivory Arhat tower. The Jinchi was invisible and traceless. When Li Yundong controlled his Jinchi to approach the ivory Arhat tower, in an instant, the ivory Arhat tower emitted a dazzling golden light. Many people on the scene suddenly cried out in alarm and stood up in horror. Li Yundong also suddenly widened his eyes and looked at Ziyuan in disbelief. He asked in surprise, "What's going on?" Ziyuan's face was as dark as water. She said in a deep voice, "If I'm not mistaken, this is a powerful magical weapon of Buddhism, the Arhat demon-subduing tower." What? Zhou Qin, Su Chan and Ao Wushuang were all shocked. Arhat demon-subduing tower? How is this possible? Why would another powerful magical weapon appear at this auction? Chapter 610. For a moment, Zhou Qin and the others couldn't understand why there would be other powerful magical weapons in this auction, which was supposed to be a competition for the Medicine King tripod. The appearance of the Arhat demon-subduing pagoda was like the appearance of a Qing Yaojin. It immediately disrupted the situation on the field. Everyone began to talk about it, and for a moment the field was like a boiling pot. Go to the internet. There was a sneer at the corner of Ziyuan's mouth. She kept looking around as if she was looking for something. She sneered in a low voice and said, "Because someone wants to mess up the situation more than us." Zhou Qin was also an extremely smart person. She quickly reacted, widened her eyes and said, "Could it be that someone wants to deliberately consume the opponent, so they put a real powerful magical weapon up?" Ziyuan nodded slightly. She turned her face and said to Zhou Qin with a faint smile, "There is only one Medicine King tripod. That is to say, only one sect or at most two sects united together can obtain this supreme Taoist magic weapon for alchemy. It can be said that there are too many monks and too little porridge. But think about it, those who are weaker and can't get the Medicine King tripod. If they realize that they can't get the Medicine King tripod, it seems not bad to turn around and grab another powerful magical weapon, right? At least they didn't go back empty-handed. At this time, Ao Wushuang also sneered again and again. Good means good strategy. This can not only shake the determination of many weaker cultivation sects, but also consume their funds. Hey, I just don't know who used this method. It's almost as good as Wang Jinyuan's 2 peaches and 3 soldiers. Li Yundong laughed and said, it's just that killing 10,000 enemies and losing 3,000 soldiers. Aren't they afraid of losing their wives and soldiers? Chris, who had been silent all this time, turned her head to look at Li Yundong, and then at Su Chan and the others. She didn't understand the situation on the field, but it was the first time she had seen such a hot atmosphere at the beginning of an auction. Not only Chris, but Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki of Jinyan Tantrism were also staring at each other with their mouths agape. Tuki said, Changxing, what's going on? Saionji Tsunekatsu sneered and said, the Chinese are crazy. These Chinese people only knew how to fight among themselves. They only knew how to cause internal strife. Humph, to actually use this kind of method. Ignore them. We only want the Medicine King tripod. These are just distractions. They are useful for those who are not determined. Tuki said anxiously, Changxing Jun, this is the Arhat demon subduing pagoda. This was a supreme-grade Buddhist treasure. It would have been fine if we hadn't seen it, but now that it has appeared in the auction, how could we not fight for it? Saionji Tsunekatsu's face was gloomy and his eyes were fixed on the Arhat demon subduing tower, which was shining with golden light on the auction platform. He knew that this magic weapon originated from the Wei, Jin, and Northern dynasties period in Chinese history. At that time, Emperor Liang Wu, the emperor of the Southern dynasty, believed in Buddhism and denounced Taoist cultivation sects such as Shushan as demons and evil spirits. He also gathered countless eminent monks and mages to refine this Arhat demon-subduing tower. It was said that this Arhat demon-subduing tower looked ordinary on the outside, but inside it was carved with 999 Arhats. Once this Arhat demon-subduing tower covered a demon ghost, these 999 Arhats would chant scriptures together, trap the demon and make it impossible for him to move. It would be a lie to say that he was not tempted by such a powerful magical weapon. Saionji Tsunekatsu gritted his teeth and hesitated for a while. He turned his head and shouted at Tuki in a low voice, Bastard, I am young Sungjing. Listen to me. Ignore this powerful magical weapon. We only want the Medicine King tripod. Tuki Jun's face was gloomy and he lowered his head helplessly. Yes, Tuki Jun. At this time the auctioneer on the stage also shouted excitedly, Look, everyone, this is the Ivory Arhat Tower. Now it has shown its spirit. 1,002,000 for one. What are you still hesitating for? 1,002,000 twice, 1 million. Someone is calling a higher price, 1 million. 1 million. Is there a higher price? At this time, the plans of all the cultivation sects were completely disrupted by this Arhat demon-subduing tower. As Ziyuan had expected, many of the weaker cultivation sects began to be seriously shaken. For a moment they were wavering. They didn't know whether they should grab this powerful magical weapon in front of them or save money to grab the Medicine King tripod later. Some powerful cultivation sects also wanted to disrupt the situation on the scene. They also raised the price one after another, creating a chaotic scene of driving up the price, which made the weaker cultivation sects more and more hesitant. At this time, Qin Wansai's face was also full of doubts. He looked in the direction of Li Yundong from time to time. Shen Yu and Shen Hui, who had come with him to the auction, also tried to persuade him, Dad, don't you like this kind of evil suppressing thing the most? Or is it blessed? Don't you want to buy it? Chen Wankai saw that Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others had been whispering to each other. For a moment he couldn't figure out what Li Yundong was thinking, so he withdrew his gaze and said lightly, Don't worry, let's wait and see. At this time, the price on the field had been raised to 5 million yuan, but 5 million yuan was still an unimaginably low price for such a demon-subduing Arhat tower. Li Yundong, who had been watching quietly, laughed at this time. He snorted and said in a low voice, No wonder so many people from the cultivation sects went up to see this kind of auction just now. It turns out that they have already felt that something is wrong. Hey, we were too careless. If we had seen this powerful magical weapon earlier, we would have been more prepared. Ziyuan smiled and comforted him softly, It's useless. They want to play tricks. Moreover, I can be sure that no one from the cultivation sects went to see these auction items in private, because they all came for the Medicine King tripod, so like us, they didn't think of checking other auction items. Li Yundong chuckled and said, "It's dark under the light. However, since someone wants to disturb the situation on the field, well, let's cooperate." Li Yundong quickly raised the sign, and the auctioneer suddenly became short of breath. He said in surprise, 10 million, buyer number 43 offered 10 million. Is there any higher price than this? 10 million once. 10 million twice. For a moment, everyone on the field looked at Li Yundong. Zhou Ping, who was sitting in the front row, looked back at Li Yundong. She frowned and said to Zhang Ling, "Master, is it Li Yundong who is playing tricks?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "I don't know. It doesn't matter who is playing tricks. What's important is that now that things have come to this, we have to find a way to consume the opponent's funds as much as possible, so..." Before she could finish her words, she also raised the sign. The auctioneer suddenly took a deep breath and said in surprise, 20 million, someone has offered 20 million. He had seen a lot of auctioneers and had seen all kinds of fierce auctions, but this was the first time he had seen an auction where the price was so high that it was multiplied by several times. This was too exaggerated. The ordinary businessmen and buyers all looked at Zhang Ling in shock and anger, wanting to see who this person was who did not play according to common sense at all. "You can't play like this. You can't raise the price like this." Rong Guofa, who had originally wanted to buy this item, was also stunned. The development of the situation was completely beyond his imagination. Although 20 million was not a large amount for him, spending 20 million to buy an ivory Arhat tower to please a beauty? This seems a little too exaggerated. But Rong Guofa was hesitating in his heart. At this time, Li Yundong once again joined in the fun and raised the price, and it was 10 million. At this time, the auctioneer was already fanatical as if he had been injected with chicken blood. This item was completely beyond their expectations, and it had actually risen to such a high price. He shouted loudly, 30 million, is there any higher price than this? Rong Guofa was also completely shocked. He looked at Li Yundong dumbfounded and thought in his heart, this guy, is he so rich? Could it be that he's just joking? Or, is this a sky-high price game? Sometimes, in order to make huge profits, the auction house would arrange many shills to raise the price of the auction items on the scene, creating the illusion of a hot atmosphere, thus stimulating some new collectors to buy a collection that was not worth that much at all. This kind of behavior was called a sky-high price game. But Rong Guofa looked around and saw that there were all kinds of people on the scene. The most exaggerated thing was that after Li Yundong shouted the price, the people of Shaolin Temple raised their paddles again, and this monk was still unhurriedly adding 2,000 yuan, as if no matter how high the price was, he would add 2,000 yuan to it. It was as if he was a maggot attached to the bone. If this is a sky-high price game, then this method is too clever, isn't it? Rong Guofa muttered in a low voice. But soon, Li Yundong raised his paddle again and raised the price to 40 million yuan. At this time, Zhou Qin also whispered to Li Yundong nervously, "Master, be careful. Be careful that this game of beating drums and passing flowers will stop in your hands. That will be a big loss." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "No, don't worry. Moreover, it's not a loss to buy such a powerful magical weapon for 40 million yuan. Other Taoist sects may not be able to use the powerful magical weapons of Buddhist sects when they buy them back, but for me, I don't have such worries at all." Zhou Qin smiled bitterly and said, "You're right, but what about the Medicine King tripod?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I mean in case. We still have to fight for the Medicine King tripod." At this time the atmosphere on the scene was full of gunpowder. Rong Guofa's girlfriend who had come with him, saw that everyone was fighting for it, but Rong Guofa who had been bragging to her about his wealth, was like a hesitant and frightened quail. She couldn't help but pull Rong Guofa's hand and whisper, "Hey, why don't you bid?" Rong Guofa whispered, "Are you crazy? You want to buy such an ivory Arhat tower for 40 million yuan? His girlfriend said, "Do you think everyone here is crazy? Why are they all so eager to bid for it? Moreover, didn't you see the abnormality of this ivory Arhat tower before? Can shine. It's definitely not an ordinary item." Rong Guofa laughed angrily. "I've seen this kind of method many times. It must be the auction house's trick to please the public." As soon as he finished speaking, Su Chan, who was in front of him, giggled and turned her head. She looked at him contemptuously and snorted. Then the little girl turned her head and whispered a few words in Li Yundong's ear. Then she picked up the sign in his hand and held it up again. At this time Rong Guofa only felt that all the blood in his body had rushed up with a buzz and rushed straight to the top of his head. Was there anything in this world more infuriating and irrational than being humiliated by others in front of a stunning beauty whom he had fallen in love with? The answer was, yes. He had been personally humiliated by this stunning beauty in front of other men. Su Chan didn't say a word, but Rong Guofa felt as if he had been pierced by countless sharp blades in an instant, and his whole body was covered with cuts and bruises. He suddenly remembered his behavior of showing off his wealth in front of Li Yundong. But at that time, that unknown young man was now riding on his head. What was so great about this upstart? He must be strong in appearance but weak in reality. He must be bluffing. Damn it, I want to expose his pretense. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me? I've seen this kind of bidding many times, and I'll let you know what real bidding is. Rong Guofa was so stimulated by Su Chan's gaze that he trembled all over and instantly lost his mind. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and shouted, 80 million yuan. There was a sudden uproar. I wrote too late last night and didn't finish it. I got up this morning to finish the last point and quickly send it up. This is yesterday's second update. Sorry everyone. Chapter 6:11. The auctioneer was dumbfounded. It was as if he couldn't believe his ears. An item that had a base price of 100,000 had actually been raised to 80 million. Was there something wrong with his ears, or was this world too crazy? The cultivators of the other sects were also shocked. They looked at Rongguo with their mouths agape. This was the first time they had seen someone raise the price from 40 million to 80 million. This was simply too exaggerated. Rongguo's girlfriend was also frightened by his behavior. She stared at him blankly and couldn't speak for a while. She just gently pulled his sleeve. Watch net. After Rongguo stood up and shouted, he immediately regretted it. As the saying goes, impulsiveness is the devil. Sometimes when people's emotions come, they really can't stop it. At this time, Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school turned her face and looked at Rongguo coldly. She sneered at Zhou Ping in a low voice and said, Hey, just now I saw him looking at Li Yundong and the others. Now it seems, humph, it's very likely that he's Li Yundong's shill. Zhou Ping also sneered and said, You want to raise the price to exhaust us? Then you should also lift it slowly. Why are you lifting it so many times? Zhang Ling chuckled. 80 million. That's not a small number. Now all the cultivation sects had to make a choice. Should they choose to let someone take away this Arhat demon-subduing tower? Should I conserve my strength? Or should I continue to follow up and eat the demon-subduing Arhat tower myself so that I won't return empty-handed in the future? Zhou Ping also whispered, The most important thing is that Li Yundong is a Taoist cultivator who can use Buddhist powerful magical weapons. If this powerful magical weapon falls into his hands, it will definitely be like adding wings to a tiger. It would be great if we can ensure that he doesn't get his hands on this magic treasure. Zhang Ling glanced at Rong Guofeng unkindly. Especially when she saw the hidden complacent smiles between Su Chan and Zhou Qin, she became more and more certain in her heart. She said, Humph, it's hard to say. However, it's better if we can spend some of their money. At this moment, she turned her head and looked in a certain direction. She nodded lightly at a plain-looking middle-aged man. The middle-aged man immediately raised the paddle in his hand. The auctioneer immediately shouted, Someone has offered a higher price. 80,002,000. Is there a higher price than this? However, Rongguo didn't raise the price again. He seemed to have used up all his strength and slowly sat down in his seat, as if he had just been in a sauna. 80 million, he had almost lost it. 80 million, as was almost. Rong Guofeng's heart was pounding and he couldn't help being afraid. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. As the saying goes, the first burst of energy, the second burst of energy, and the third burst of energy. For a moment, Rong Guofeng didn't want to compete with Li Yundong anymore. He still wanted to buy something. At this moment, Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other. Ziyuan nodded slightly and said softly, This is the bottom line. Don't raise the price anymore. At this time, the game of beating the drums and passing the flowers has reached its limit. If you shout again, it is very likely that you will really fall on your head. Li Yunyang also nodded and smiled. I think so too. Although the Arhat demon-subduing tower is a powerful Buddhist magic weapon, it only has a single sealing function. In a fight, its actual effect is far inferior to the fan of 7 treasures. So, I'll buy this magic weapon for 80 million yuan. At this time, the cultivators of all sects and schools seemed to have the same thought. They all stopped raising their paddles and the real businessmen and buyers were frightened by this kind of madness. For a moment they all became spectators. No one raised their paddles again. At this time, Only the auctioneer was left in the originally lively auction house. He shouted on the stage, 80 million 2000 once. 80 million 2000 twice. At this time Zhou Ping said anxiously, Master, why is no one bidding? Zhang Ling smiled slightly and said to Zhou Ping, don't worry, there will definitely be someone else bidding. As soon as she finished speaking, the auctioneer smashed down with his hammer. 80 million 2000 thrice. Sold. Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping were dumbfounded. They looked at each other in dismay, and their hearts were filled with rage. Zhou Ping said in a low voice, Master, we've been tricked. We've been plotted against. Zhang Ling's original intention was not to rob this powerful magical weapon. From beginning to end, she just wanted to rob the Medicine King tripod. However, she thought that she had discovered Li Jiandong's shill, so she deliberately raised the price again, trying to consume more of Li Jiandong's funds. But she had never expected that this guy would actually give in. She had actually bought this Arhat demon subduing tower. Although this powerful magical weapon was powerful, she couldn't use it after buying it. Bastard, 80 million. Zhang Kongyun, who had been watching coldly from the side, sighed and whispered to his disciple, Zhang Lufang with a smile, this is great. She's playing with fire. Zhang Liufang's face was full of worry. Master, do we have enough money to buy the Medicine King tripod? Zhang Ling heard their words clearly, and her face turned blue and red. She shouted angrily at Zhang Lufang in a low voice, does our Jingyi school lack this little money? Zhang Lufang was so scared that she stuck out her tongue and lowered her head, not daring to speak. Zhang Kongyun said unhappily, Eldest Shiji, why are you shouting at the younger generation? If you have the ability, go and shout at the one who raised the price. Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She angrily turned her head and glared at Rong Guofeng, as if she wanted to remember his appearance in her heart. She gritted her teeth and sneered in her heart, Humph, well done. I'll remember this. Li Yundong saw the expressions of Zhang Ling and the others. He couldn't help laughing and said, very well, the Jingyi school has been exhausted in advance. Now they've suffered a loss. Ziyuan smiled and said, we can't be careless. The Jingyi school is rich. Li Yundong suddenly thought of something. He looked around curiously and said in a low voice, by the way, why didn't I see anyone from the Gizao sect of external alchemy? Logically speaking, the richest sect should be the Gizao sect. Why didn't Wang Jinyun come? Doesn't he want his powerful magical weapon anymore? Zhou Qin sneered and said, Master, he could only grab one Duan Jindan and escape. Didn't he think that he would leave this Medicine King tripod behind and cause our sects to kill each other and become enemies? Li Yundong furrowed his brows. Well, it's not impossible. But Li Yundong was about to continue when he saw Su Chan tugging at his arm with all her might. She was smiling at him as if she was waiting for a reward. Li Yundong asked curiously, what's wrong? What are you laughing at? Su Chan laughed so hard that her nose and eyes were gone. She leaned over to Li Yundong's ear and whispered a few words. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and quickly glanced at Rong Guofeng behind him. He reached out his hand and scratched the tip of Su Chan's nose. He whispered with a smile, it turns out that this was your idea. I was wondering why he suddenly became crazy. Good, amazing, you did a good job this time. I'll reward you well when we go home. Li Yundong's last sentence was extremely ambiguous, which made the little girl giggle. She thought of the passion they had when they had kissed before and couldn't help but feel an itch in her heart. She wished she could be intimate with Li Yundong here and now. Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others were talking and laughing happily. When Zhang Ling saw their relaxed and happy scene, she felt so angry that her heart was bleeding, and she sneered again and again. After the interlude of the ivory Arhat tower, the next few auction items were not as crazy as before. Some ordinary businessmen and buyers saw that no one was driving up the price again, so they tentatively offered a few rounds of prices, and then hastily made the final decision. After the battle, all the sects seemed to be recuperating, storing energy and waiting for the real battle. Very quickly, all the auction items were successfully auctioned off. When the last item was taken out, everyone couldn't help but sit up straight. Their eyes lit up as they looked at a purplish-gold three-legged cauldron that was surrounded by a faint white mist. The Medicine King tripod. The auctioneer passionately introduced the appraisal and historical background of the Medicine King tripod on the stage, and invited the bidders under the stage to watch it. At this time, none of the cultivators from various sects went up to watch. Instead, some ordinary businessmen and buyers came forward to watch. When they saw the Medicine King tripod surrounded by white mist, they couldn't help sighing and nodding in praise. After looking around on the stage, Rong Guogua returned to his seat and said to his girlfriend excitedly, "It's indeed a divine item, a rare treasure. This is what I want." His girlfriend also flattered him and said with a smile, "That's right. Your taste is definitely right." At this time, Su Chan turned around and said with a malicious smile, "Give up. You can't get it?" The smile on Rong Guogua's face froze. "What do you mean by that?" Su Chan giggled and said, "Nothing. You couldn't buy the ivory tower just now, let alone this one." After that, she turned her face away again. Rong Guogua was so angry that he roared in his heart, "The one just now was not what I really wanted to buy. Moreover, 80 million yuan for something with a base price of 100,000 yuan. Are you crazy? This is what I want to buy. Let's see if I can buy it later." Rong Guogua was so angry that his face turned red, and his blood vessels bulged. Seeing this, his girlfriend whispered, "Mr. Rong, don't care about this little girl." Before she could finish her words, Rong Guogua turned his head and roared at her in a low voice, "Shut up." The woman was shocked and didn't dare to speak again. Rong Guogua stared at the Medicine King tripod with red eyes, as if he wanted to eat it in one bite. Not long after, the auctioneer began to announce the start of the bidding for the Medicine King tripod. The base price was 5 million yuan, and the lowest bid was 10,000 yuan. Rong Guogua immediately raised the sign in his hand and shouted, 10 million. The first bid was doubled. The auctioneer was shocked. He excitedly pointed the hammer in the direction of Rong Guogua and said loudly, "Someone offered 10 million yuan. Is there any higher bid than this?" Zhang Ling turned her head and glanced at Rong Guogua. She sneered and raised the sign in her hand. 20 million. Wow, the second bid doubled again. The ordinary businessmen and buyers on the scene were dumbfounded. They had never seen such an auction. Li Yunyang and Su Chan looked at each other, and there was no longer the relaxed smile on their faces. Ziyuan said in a deep voice, "The real battle of Jinyuan has begun." Although Chris was born in a big family in the United States and often went to all kinds of high-class places, it was the first time she had seen such an auction where the price had doubled. She muttered in a low voice, "It's so fierce." Although Chen Wankai didn't know what the Medicine King tripod meant to cultivators, he was also keenly aware of the strange atmosphere on the scene. He frowned and quickly calculated in his heart. His eyes kept looking in the direction of Li Yunyang. Sanji Tsunekatsu, who was sitting not far from him, saw Rong Guogua bid again and raised the price of the Medicine King tripod to 50 million yuan. He smiled coldly and said to Tuki, "It's ridiculous that the powerful magical weapon used by Sun Simiao, the king of medicine, is being bid at such a low price. Tuki, we can make our move now." Tuki nodded, raised the sign in his hand and shouted in stiff Chinese, 51 million. As soon as he finished speaking, Sanji Tsunekatsu angrily scolded him in Japanese, "Bastard, don't you think you're losing face for our Jinyan Tantrism by bidding like this?" After that, he grabbed the sign in Tuki's hand, raised it high and shouted, 100 million. This is the first update on the 11th. Well. Chapter 6:12. Sanji Tsunekatsu's bid almost made Rong Guo fall down. He looked at Sanji Tsunekatsu dumbfounded and said, "What is this Japanese doing? Is he crazy? Is there such a bid? No matter how valuable this thing is, it's not worth 100 million. Shin Yu and Shin Hui, who had followed Shin Wankai to watch the fun, were also shocked by Sanji Tsunekatsu's overbearing bid. Shin Hui whispered to her father, "Old man, this Japanese is so fierce. Is this Medicine King tripod worth so much money?" Shin Wankai narrowed his eyes and stared at Sanji Tsunekatsu. He said in a low voice, "I don't know if it's worth that much. Go to the internet." But what? Shin Hui asked curiously. Shin Wankai quickly glanced at Li Yundong and said calmly, "However, I will know in a moment whether this thing is worth that much money." Shin Wankai didn't expect that the price of this Medicine King tripod would soar to such a high level in an instant. The increase was so great that it was even more exaggerated than the price of a house. But for a scheming and calculating businessman like him, the most important thing now was to confirm the approximate value of this Medicine King tripod in Li Yundong's mind, and then calculate whether he should make a move or not. In the face of Sanji Tsunekatsu's crazy bid, the auction house instantly fell into a moment of dead silence. Obviously, Sanji Tsunekatsu's bid this time was like a heavy punch, heavily hitting the hearts of almost everyone on the scene, hitting their first psychological bottom line. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said with a pale face, "Yundong, do we need to increase the price?" Li Yundong looked at Sanji Tsunekatsu as if he was facing a formidable enemy, and said with a heavy face, "I don't know, but I have a very bad feeling." After all, Zhou Qin was from a big family and was experienced and knowledgeable. As soon as she saw Sanji Tsunekatsu's posture, she whispered, "Not good, this guy seems to be determined to win. Master, what should we do?" Li Yundong quickly calculated in his mind. This time they had raised 50 million yuan. According to Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, they could mobilize about 90 million yuan to participate in the auction. Even if they calculated the repayment ability of the installments, the maximum amount of the two sides could not exceed 300 million yuan. Otherwise their business would be in big trouble. However, the price had exceeded the 100 million mark in just a few bids. If it continued to grow at this rate, would he be able to compete with the Japanese? Even if he could bid for the Medicine King tripod at that time, if the bidding was too fierce, he would get into debt and think about how to get money to pay off the debt all day long. Then what was the point of cultivating? Even if the Medicine King tripod could be used for alchemy, the alchemy cycle would be too long. At that time, everyone in the Fox Zen school would definitely abandon their cultivation and be busy making money all day long. This was a matter of killing 10,000 enemies with 12,000 casualties. The losses outweighed the gains. What if the Japanese had such an idea? What could they do? Even if they didn't have this idea, the other sects would definitely be happy to see it happen. As the saying goes, it's better to cut off one finger than to injure all 10 fingers. Rather than fighting while bathed in blood, it was better to give up decisively so as to avoid sinking into the mud pit. However, was the Medicine King tripod going to be given up just like that? Seeing that Li Yundong was hesitant, Ziyuan advised him softly, "Li Yundong, we haven't reached our bottom line yet. We can first test how determined the Japanese's attitude is." Li Yundong had been hesitant between insisting and giving up. At this time, when Ziyuan said this, Li Yundong immediately had an idea. He nodded to Ziyuan and quickly raised the sign. The auctioneer had expected that the Medicine King tripod would be sold at an amazing high price, and even many of the bidders in the auction house had ambushed them. However, what he hadn't expected was that as soon as the auction of the Medicine King tripod began, the atmosphere would become white-hot. He was so excited that his voice was a little out of shape. He shouted, 100 million going once. Is there any higher price than this? 100 million going twice. 130 million. Someone offered 140 million. Is there a higher price than this? When the ordinary businessmen who had wanted to bid for the Medicine King tripod heard this price, there was an uproar. It was already very exaggerated that the previous price had soared from 50 million to 100 million. They didn't expect that there would be another price increase. Moreover, the price was raised to 140 million this time. It was too fierce. It was too bloody. When Du Fei heard Li Yundong's bid, his eyes involuntarily looked at him. When his eyes met Li Yundong's, he nodded slightly to him, showing a trace of appreciation in his eyes. Du Fei was both a cultivator and an experienced businessman. He naturally knew that Li Yundong's huge increase in the price in an instant was the best response to Sanji Tsunekatsu. The auction was like a narrow path that only allowed one person to walk. As the saying goes, the brave wins when they meet on a narrow road. Sanji Tsunekatsu raised the price fiercely. On the one hand he showed his wealth and strength. On the other hand he deterred every bidder who wanted to bid and showed his determination to win. And Li Yundong expressed a very tough attitude to Sanji Tsunekatsu with the same astonishing amount of increase, and this attitude was very likely to make the other party think, the opponent is also very rich and this thing is also determined to be his. At this time the other party would either be frightened by the other party's momentum like when playing haha, or meet on a narrow road. But at this time what would Sanji Tsunekatsu do? Sanji Tsunekatsu glanced at Li Yundong and frowned slightly. He stared at Li Yundong like lightning without blinking, as if he wanted to see through Li Yundong's heart in an instant and see how many cards in his hand could support him. Li Yundong also looked at Sanji Tsunekatsu without showing any weakness. When their eyes met, the air seemed to spark. Although there was nothing unusual on Su Chan's face, her nervous hand tightly grasped Li Yundong's wide palm. Her body trembled slightly. She kept saying in her heart, "Don't raise the price, don't raise the price." As if he had heard Su Chan's prayer, Sanji Tsunekatsu was silent for a long time and did not speak again. At this time the auctioneer on the stage also shouted, 140 million going once. Is there any higher price than this? 140 million. Twice. At this time not only Su Chan but also Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, who had seen a lot of wind, couldn't help but be a little nervous. Their eyes were fixed on the gavel in the auctioneer's hand, and their ears were all pricked up, listening for anyone around to continue to raise the price. Just when the auctioneer shouted for the third time, suddenly, a hand was raised high in the front row, and a cold voice sounded, 200 million. There was another burst of exclamation on the scene. Li Yundong and the others immediately looked at this person. Zhang Ling. Li Yundong gritted his teeth fiercely and whispered, "Damn it. Is she starting to want strength?" This time, Zhang Ling's bid completely broke through the first psychological bottom line of everyone on the scene. It was like when a long-distance run reached its limit, the runner would often struggle painfully. Do you want to persist? But when they broke through this limit, they could often continue to run smoothly. And this time, Zhang Ling's bid completely made everyone on the scene understand in an instant. The Medicine King tripod would definitely be auctioned at a bloody price. If you didn't have the strength and psychological preparation, you'd better give up as soon as possible. In an instant, many cultivation sects and some ordinary businessmen who were interested in bidding chose to give up. They changed from participants to spectators in an instant. The price of 200 million had also greatly broken through the first psychological bottom line of Li Yundong and the others. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect from a distance. Both of them saw a little fear in each other's eyes. Du Fei's eyes were full of hesitation and panic, and Li Yundong's eyes were also full of unwillingness and hesitation. The situation on the field had begun to show a trend out of their expectations and control, but they could do nothing about it. At this time, the auctioneer was also trembling with excitement, and his eyes were a little red. He knew that at the end of this auction, no matter what the result was, it would set a record for domestic auctions. Although there were few cases of works of art being auctioned in domestic auctions, people in the auction industry had boldly predicted that the era of art auctions that were often auctioned would soon come. But the auctioneer didn't expect that it would be so fast and that it would be born in his own hands. At this time, the villagers of Mount Huangshan who were watching the auction backstage had already fainted with excitement. He didn't expect that this thing he had seen casually could be auctioned at such a terrifying price. The auctioneer shouted in a hoarse voice, 200 million, is there any higher price than this? 200 million going once. At this time, very few people on the field were bidding, and Sayonji Tsunekatsu and others were also hesitating. Although he had obtained the consent and support of Masako Tachibana before, if the price paid was too high, he would not be able to bear the consequences. But, should he just give up like this? Sayonji Tsunekatsu clenched his fists tightly. He gritted his teeth and shouted, 300 million. Wow. Almost everyone on the field was frightened by Sayonji Tsunekatsu's madness. Even the auctioneer's heart almost beat too fast for a moment, and he fainted on the spot. Throughout the world's auction history, no one had ever raised the price by such a huge margin. This Sayonji Tsunekatsu was either crazy or determined to get the Medicine King tripod. At this time, Li Yundong and Zhang Ling were frightened by the madness of Sayonji Tsunekatsu. Although Jingyi School was the largest sect in the cultivation world, it almost didn't have its own large enterprises. A large part of their money depended on incense donations. It could also be said that this was consuming the savings and resources of Jingyi School. If they fought too fiercely this time, it would hurt their muscles and bones. Cultivation was the most expensive thing in this world. Dharma, money, companions, and earthly treasures. How could one cultivate without money? What's more, how could they support such a large sect? Zhang Ling looked at Sayonji Tsunekatsu in shock. She knew that if they really competed with Xinyan Tantrism in terms of money, Jingyi School would definitely not win. The only one in the Chinese cultivation world that could compete with them was probably the Gizao sect of external alchemy. After all, the accumulation of Xinyan Tantrism for thousands of years was too deep, especially in Japan, where the control of the cultivation world was relatively loose. It could even be said that the Japanese cultivation world had penetrated deeply into this country. The political world of this country could be infiltrated and controlled by the forces of the underworld, let alone the cultivation world. Once the power of the cultivation world was combined with the power of the country, the great power produced was unimaginable by ordinary people. This Sayonji Tsunekatsu. Is he really here to rob the Medicine King tripod on behalf of Xinyan Tantrism? Zhang Ling stared at Sayonji Tsunekatsu and thought quickly, isn't he afraid that the cultivation world of China and Japan will become enemies? Or is he just scaring me? Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said to Zhang Ling, Master, why don't we just fight with the Japanese? Zhang Ling's face was extremely ugly. She was hesitant for a moment, but the auctioneer on the stage would not wait for her. He shouted hysterically 3 times in a row. When the hammer was about to fall, Zhang Kongyun suddenly raised the sign in his hand and shouted, 350 million. Wow. Everyone was horrified. At this time, most of the people on the scene had already given up. They just looked at the scene curiously. What kind of terrible price can this Medicine King tripod sell for? When Zhang Ling heard Zhang Kongyun's bid, she suddenly turned her head, stared at him and whispered, Sure this is all the money we can use. Zhang Kongyun laughed and said lightly, I know. Anyway, there are only so many trump cards. It's better to push them all out at once. Zhang Ling turned her head and glared at Rongguo with a face full of unwillingness. She thought bitterly in her heart, if it weren't for this bastard spending 80 million in advance. Humph. Many times bidding is like riding a tiger. The later it is, the more dangerous it is. Moreover, the later it is, the more difficult it is to ride a tiger. No one is willing to admit defeat easily. Often, bidders are gambling and fighting for a bit of face. As the saying goes, people fight for a breath and Buddha fights for a stick of incense. But no matter what, in the face of the astonishing high price of 350 million, Saionji Tsunekatsu could not calm down at this time. The body of Rigoino Tsunekatsu was trembling slightly, and Tuki, who was beside him, was pale and kept swallowing. Tuki whispered to Saionji Tsunekatsu, Lord Changxing, you can't increase it anymore. If you increase it again, Masako Tachibana will be angry. Saionji Tsunekatsu gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, if you can't complete her task, it will not be as simple as being angry. Saionji Tsunekatsu made up his mind and shouted resolutely, 400 million. The entire arena nearly exploded. Saionji Tsunekatsu called a price 3 times in total. The first time was 100 million, the second time was 300 million, and the third time was 400 million. Such an amazing increase in price was unprecedented and frightening. Zhang Ling was instantly overwhelmed by the absolute momentum of Saionji Tsunekatsu. It was as if a sword had pierced through her heart. Her face was pale and for a moment she was stunned and speechless. Zhang Kongyun couldn't help shaking his head and sighing, his face full of helplessness and regret. Su Chan pinched Li Yundong's hand in horror and whispered, Yundong, it's already 400 million. This, what should we do? Li Yundong sighed and said painfully, don't think about it. Things have completely exceeded our expectations. This is not a price we can afford. We are out. Although they had expected such a situation, the faces of Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all gloomy and ugly. Ao Wushuang also sighed and shook her head. This is God's will. There's nothing we can do. Su Chan was shocked and said, will the Medicine King tripod be taken away by the Japanese like this? Li Yundong watched the auctioneer on the stage repeat the current price again and again. He fixed his eyes on the auctioneer's hammer falling little by little. But just as the hammer was about to be finalized, someone on the field suddenly raised a hand. The auctioneer's hammer instantly stopped in midair. He shouted excitedly in a hoarse voice, someone has bid a higher price. 410 million, is there a higher price than this? Everyone on the field had thought that 400 million would be the final price, but they didn't expect that someone would raise the price again at this time. Who was this person? Why did he go crazy with Saionji Tsunekatsu? This auction had completely turned into a hand-to-hand fight between madmen. The battle of gold yuan on the field had reached its climax, and the air was filled with a terrible smell of blood. For a moment, everyone's eyes turned to look at this person. Chapter 613. Everyone looked at the person who raised the sign, only to see that this person looked ordinary. He was an old man in his 60s. This old man was wearing a bright yellow long gown and a hand-sewn fur waistcoat. Compared to the rich businessmen around him who were dressed in suits and leather shoes, he was really not eye-catching. Go to CNET. 7KOM. Book_bar_first. In addition to the previous bidding, the old man had never raised his paddle from beginning to end, but no one had expected that the one who had gone crazy with Saionji Tsunekatsu was the guy who had never raised his paddle from beginning to end at the auction. Li Yundong suddenly looked over and was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes and said in surprise, why did Mr. Shin make a move? Zhou Qin said with both surprise and excitement, great, Mr. Shin made a move. I was scared to death. I thought the Medicine King tripod was going to be bought by the Japanese. Su Chan's eyes widened and she looked at Shin Wan Kai in astonishment. She asked Li Yundong in a low voice, Yundong, is Mr. Shin so rich? 400 million yuan. Not 40,000 yuan. Before Li Yundong could speak, Zhou Qin laughed and said, Su Chan, don't underestimate Shin Wan Kai. He is a real rich man, but he is relatively low-key, so he is not famous. You see, when he met the mayor at the opening ceremony of Desanxian, he didn't even bother to get close to him. He just greeted the secretary of the provincial party committee. Just from this style you can see how powerful he is. Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said, "So powerful? I underestimated him. I thought he was just an ordinary rich man." Zhou Qin laughed and said, "There are many rich people in China now, and there are as many hidden rich families as there are hairs on an ox. Shen Wankai is one of them. My father used to comment on him to me. He said that he was a decisive and astute person who never fought an unprepared battle. As long as he made a move, he must be fully prepared." She stared at Shen Wankai for a while and then looked at him. Her deep and dark eyes seemed to see through people's hearts and the world in an instant. She vaguely touched something. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, but she didn't say anything. At this time, all his attention was focused on Shen Wankai and Saionji Tsunekatsu. Although he had become a spectator like most of the people here, watching the Medicine King tripod fall into Shen Wansai's hands was much better than watching Sun Simiao's Taoist supreme magical weapon fall into the hands of the Japanese. Saionji Tsunekatsu did not expect that after he finally defeated Zhang Ling, a bad old man would appear out of nowhere. This was like a blood-soaked warrior who had broken through the encirclement and thought that he had become the final winner. Suddenly, a new force appeared, giving Saionji Tsunekatsu a great psychological blow and a blow to his morale. Saionji Tsunekatsu stared at Shen Wankai fiercely, as if he wanted to swallow the old man who had come out of nowhere. Tuki said in a trembling voice, "Tsunekatsu, what should we do? Give up." Saionji Tsunekatsu was trembling all over. He stared at Shen Wankai unwillingly. His sharp eyes were like a sharp blade, as if he wanted to split Shen Wankai apart so that he could see through his true inner thoughts. Shen Wankai was indeed a person who was used to seeing great storms. He didn't even look at Saionji Tsunekatsu. He looked straight ahead with a faint smile on his face, as if he was looking down on everyone. Shen Yu and Shen Hui, who were beside him, were also shocked by Shen Wansai's sudden action. After a long time, Shen Hui said, "Old man, are you okay? 400 million. 400 million to buy such a thing?" Shen Yu was also shocked. "Dad, are you crazy?" Shen Wankai looked at them with great displeasure and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. What do you know?" Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that both Shen Yu and Shen Hui were questioning Shen Wankai. He thought to himself, "Is this old guy bluffing? In fact, he has also reached his limit?" Saionji Tsunekatsu quickly calculated in his heart, "Although Masako Tachibana didn't set a bottom line for me as far as I know, the bottom line in her mind should be about 500 million, but if it exceeds 400 million, she will definitely be angry. The current price is 410 million, which will already make Masako Tachibana very angry, but, if it costs 500 million to complete the task, it is not unacceptable." Saionji Tsunekatsu hesitated, and almost everyone on the scene saw the clue. Zhou Qin whispered in Li Jiandong's ear, "This Japanese is a little scared. Now the price should be closer to the limit he can bear, so he can no longer raise the price unscrupulously. In a moment, when we see what price he offers, we should guess his bottom line." Saionji Tsunekatsu thought for a moment. When he saw that the hammer in the auctioneer's hand was about to fall, he suddenly showed a grim smile, raised the sign and shouted, 500 million. F***CK. Almost half of the people on the scene stood up and looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu in astonishment. Tuki was so frightened by Saionji Tsunekatsu's action that he almost fell off his seat. He looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu with a pale face, and his lips trembled slightly. He shouted in his heart, "Tsunekatsu is crazy, he must be crazy. When we go back, we will be locked in the ghost prison by Masako Tachibana. It must be. No, I must stop him." Tuki was about to speak, but he saw that although Saionji Tsunekatsu's face was full of a desperate ferocious smile, his hands hidden behind his back were trembling slightly. Seeing this scene, Tuki swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Zhou Qin was also shocked and speechless. She couldn't speak for a long time. At this time, Li Jiandong laughed and whispered, "As the saying goes, fighting is like using troops, and the business world is like a battlefield. This Japanese guy is good at psychological warfare. I know what you just said. But even I know it, how can he not know it? So, he simply unsheathed his sword and fought with you to the death." At this time, everyone on the scene was seriously shaken by their previous judgment. Has this little Japanese guy not reached the bottom line at all? Or is he bluffing now? At this time, Li Jiandong had completely let go of the obsession of competing for the Medicine King tripod, jumped out of this circle of interests, and looked at this fierce battle from the perspective of a third party. He recalled the situation of all parties bidding at the auction before, and he seemed to understand something. He couldn't help but whisper, "There is a saying in the art of war that the false is the real, and the real is the false. I think that now this little Japanese is really at the end of his rope." Su-chan asked in confusion, "Yundong, what do you mean? Why do I feel that this Japanese guy seems to have a lot of money? You see, he increased the price by nearly 100 million yuan again. It's scary." Li Jiandong said with a smile. Before, Saionji Tsunekatsu raised the price several times in order to scare off his competitors, especially his opponents who raised the price by a lot. But Shin Kai is different. He was the last one to appear, and the increase was much smaller than in the previous rounds. If Saionji Tsunekatsu really has the confidence, he can follow Shin Kai's example and increase the price by 10 million yuan, and then grind with his opponent all the way to see who can grind to death. Hey, but this Saionji Tsunekatsu knows very well that cutting flesh with a blunt knife is the most painful, so he decided to break his wrist. It's better to break one finger than to hurt 10 fingers. Therefore, the purpose of his fourth large increase in price is to completely defeat his opponent with the momentum of a tiger that can swallow thousands of miles. At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help but look at Li Jiandong with admiration and said with a smile, "Master, you are right. If you go to do business, you will definitely be successful." If Saionji Tsunekatsu's move was used on a newcomer, it was very likely to have an effect. But Shin Kai is different. He is an old fox who has been in the business world for a lifetime. How could he fall into such a trap? As if to confirm Zhou Qin's words, Shin Kai's expression remained unchanged. He slowly raised the sign in his hand and once again increased the price by 10 million yuan. The price of the Medicine King tripod had become a terrifying 510 million yuan. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu's face couldn't help but change dramatically. At this time he also suddenly came to his senses. He knew that his opponent was a very cunning old fox. Not only was he cunning but he was also experienced. This move of his was useless against the opponent. But at this time he had already called the limit price. What should he do? Saionji Tsunekatsu's whole body trembled uncontrollably. He gritted his teeth. When the auctioneer repeated the price again and again, he suddenly roared, 520 million yuan. At this time there was another burst of sigh. Unlike the previous sigh, at this time, everyone heard Saionji Tsunekatsu's fierce appearance but weak heart. They all noticed that the Japanese was on the verge of collapse. At this time, the eyes of the audience involuntarily turned to Shin Kai, wondering in their hearts, is this old man also on the verge of collapse? Is he just not showing it? Although the increase of the price had been reduced at this time, the atmosphere on the scene became more and more tense. Su-chan held Li Yundong's hand tightly and whispered nervously, "Yundong, this Japanese also raised the price slightly. Is he going to fight a war of attrition with Mr. Shin?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It should be like this. However, I don't know where Mr. Shin's bottom line is, so I don't know who will win if the two of them continue to consume each other. But in terms of momentum and psychological advantage, Mr. Shin has already taken the advantage." As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, Shin Kai slowly raised the sign and raised the price by 10 million yuan again. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu was completely like a red-eyed gambler. He immediately roared, 540 million yuan. Shin Kai was not in a hurry to bid immediately. He waited until the auctioneer called for the third time before he slowly raised the sign again. 550 million yuan. Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately roared again, 560 million yuan. After a while, Shin Kai raised the sign again and said, 570 million yuan. The two of them raised the price back and forth like a barrage of cannons. Although the range was not as terrifying as before, such a blunt knife cutting flesh was really torturous. The price was approaching the 600 million yuan mark. The price of 600 million yuan meant that it was also an astonishing price in the international market, not to mention in the domestic market. At this time, everyone on the scene held their breath and did not dare to breathe more. Besides Saionji Tsunekatsu, Tuki trembled and grabbed Saionji Tsunekatsu's arm. He couldn't help but shout in Japanese, "Mr. Tsunekatsu, you can't increase it anymore. You really can't increase it anymore." Saionji Tsunekatsu turned his head and roared in Japanese with a ferocious face, "Bastard, shut up." After that, his face twisted like a devil and he roared, 600 million yuan. Everyone present took a deep breath and looked at Shin Kai in unison. Li Yundong's expression was also a little solemn. He said in a low voice, "This should be the last desperate attack of the Japanese." Ziyuan shook her head and said, "Not necessarily. The Japanese are famous for their tenacity. Their ability to resist pressure and tenacity can be called the first in the world. If Shin Wankai still follows the price of 10 million yuan, maybe it will continue to be consumed. Li Yundong nodded and said, "What you said makes sense. Let's see how Mr. Shin will bid." But at this time, Shin Wankai turned his face for the first time and looked at his opponent who was fighting with him on the battlefield. He frowned and pondered, not speaking for a while. The auctioneer on the auction stage saw that Shin Wankai had not spoken for a long time. After he kept repeating the price, he also thought that 600 million yuan should be the final price. After he quickly repeated it for the third time, he breathed a sigh of relief and raised the gavel in his hand high. At this time, Sayonji Tsunekatsu also seemed to collapse. He showed a smile of victory in a battle to the death and laughed proudly. Mr. Shin gave up? Su-chan saw the gavel fall little by little and she cried out in surprise. But at this critical moment, Shin Wankai suddenly smiled. He raised the sign in his hand and slowly said, 700 million. Chapter 6:14. Just when Sayonji Tsunekatsu thought he had won, Shin Wankai suddenly made the most fatal blow. Go to the net. 7 KOM. At this moment, Lee suddenly remembered the Pacific War between the United States and Japan from Pearl Island to Midway Island during World War II. Although all the discerning people knew that Japan would be defeated at the beginning, Japan had been retreating all the way from Midway Island, but they had been resisting all the way like cornered beasts fighting, and launched a fierce bloody battle. Even the Emperor of Japan and the crazy army headquarters were ready to mobilize the whole country to fight the landing of the Americans, but at this time the Americans knew that they would suffer heavy losses if they landed in Japan, so they gave the Japanese the most terrible blow: atomic bombing. Although the number of people killed by the 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was far less than the number of Japanese soldiers killed on the battlefield, when the Japanese were ready to fight the final war of attrition with the other side, the Americans suddenly gave them the most unimaginable blow. As the saying goes, the market is the battlefield and fighting is like using troops. Shin Wankai had been fighting hand-to-hand with Sayonji Tsunekatsu, but at the last moment, when Sayonji Tsunekatsu thought he had won, he suddenly threw the atomic bomb. This sudden huge increase in price finally broke the will of Sayonji Tsunekatsu and completely destroyed his idea of winning. 700 million. This was an auction price that could shock the world. Wow! Almost everyone on the scene exclaimed. Sayonji Tsunekatsu's laughter suddenly stopped. It was as if someone had hollowed out his chest. His body shook, his face became pale, and he stayed where he was as if he had lost his soul. The auctioneer was also stimulated by this price and almost had a heart attack again. He shouted in a hoarse voice, 700 million. Is there a higher price than this? 700 million once. 700 million twice. 700 million thrice. Sold? The mallet finally landed heavily. Everyone let out a long sigh of relief. They couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh with emotion. My God, 700 million. What kind of concept was this? It was about to refresh the world auction price. The auctioneer's face was flushed, and his heart was thumping wildly. He knew that no matter what the outcome was, their Tianai auction house would become famous throughout the world. Shin Hui and Shin Yu sat beside Shin Wankai in a daze. They stared blankly at their father without any joy of victory. Instead, they looked at Shin Wankai with an inexplicable blank gaze, as if they didn't know this person at all. Sayonji Tsunekatsu stood there like a dead man. Tuki, who was beside him, looked as if he had lost his parents. He smiled bitterly and said to Sayonji Tsunekatsu, Mr. Tsunekatsu, we failed. Forget it, let's go back. Sayonji Tsunekatsu didn't seem to hear it. His eyes were fixed on Shin Wankai. In his eyes, after Shin Wankai succeeded in the auction, he did not have a sense of victory and joy. Instead, he frowned slightly as if there was something unhappy. Sayonji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but think, is he also close to his limit? Or if he persisted a little longer, would he give up? Thinking of this, Sayonji Tsunekatsu could not help but grit his teeth and walk toward Shin Wankai. When Tuki saw this, he quickly grabbed him and whispered in Japanese, Mr. Tsunekatsu, calm down. What are you going to do? Sayonji Tsunekatsu didn't even look at him. He pushed him away and walked straight to Shin Wankai, staring at him with gloomy and terrifying eyes. Seeing this, Shinyu stood up and shouted, What do you want? Sayonji Tsunekatsu turned his head and glared at him. Shinyu suddenly felt as if his heart had been stabbed by a knife. He fell into his seat and trembled all over. Shin Hui stood up at this time and said angrily, Do you want to hit someone after losing? At this time, Li Yundong and the others also came over. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Sanjitsu Nakatsu, look at where you are standing under your feet. This is China, not Japan. After he finished speaking, Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect also stood up with a smile. Sun Wei Qing, who was beside him, also stood up and stared at him unkindly. Then the cultivators of all the sects on the field all stood up with a common enemy and stared at Sanjitsu Nakatsu. The fierceness on Sanjitsu Nakatsu's face suddenly dissipated a lot. He took a deep breath, bowed respectfully to Shenwan Kai and said, I would like to ask your name. Shenwan Kai nodded gratefully to Li Yundong and the others. He smiled slightly and said, Shenwan Kai? Sanjitsu Nakatsu looked respectful and said, Shin Jun. May I ask why you have to compete with me for this Medicine King tripod? Shenwan Kai smiled slightly and said, because anyone can take this Medicine King tripod, but you Japanese can't. This sentence immediately caused the whole audience to cheer loudly. For a time the applause on the field was like thunder and there were bursts of cheers. At this time Sanjitsu Nakatsu bent down, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. But when he raised his body his face was humble. He said, so that's how it is. Congratulations on getting this Medicine King tripod. At this time, Li Yundong also whispered to Su Chan, I haven't seen it yet. This Mr. Shin is very patriotic. Is he also a nationalistic youth? Su Chan pursed her lips and said with a smile, he is not young. Li Yundong laughed and said, he has a young heart. He is a young man. Ziyuan, who was at the side, heard their conversation and smiled slightly. She gave Shenwan Kai a meaningful look and smiled without saying a word. At this time Rong Guofa was quite gloating. Although he didn't bid for this Medicine King tripod, what made him happy was that Li Yundong didn't get it either. It doesn't matter if I don't live well, but I'm happy to see that you don't live well either. Rong Guofa was in such a state of mind at this time. Rong Guofa hugged his girlfriend and said with a smile, do you see? Mr. Shin is the real rich man. What is momentum? What is domineering? He's different from some young nouveau riche. Hearing his words, Su Chan turned her face unhappily and said, what are you talking about? Rong Guofa raised his head and laughed. I didn't say anything. It's just that I heard some people boast before, but now they return empty-handed. At least I bought an ivory Arhat tower. It's much better than some people empty-handed, isn't it? Su Chan was furious. Just as she was about to quarrel with him, Li Yundong stopped her and said to her with a smile, Chaner, don't tell him. It's meaningless. Seeing that Li Yundong had backed down, Rong Guofa thought that he was afraid to fight. He suddenly felt a sense of exultation. He sneered and said, young man, learn more. You are still young. Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't say anything. Seeing that Li Yundong had backed down again, Rong Guofa was quite unforgiving. He wanted to continue to taunt him, but he saw Shenwan Kai walking straight over at this time. He immediately greeted him with a smile and stretched out his hands. Old Shin, you have fought for our Chinese people today. Shenwan Kai saw him at a glance and shook hands with him with a smile. He smiled non-committally and said, don't mention it. It's just a child's game. Rong Guofa flattered with a smile on his face, Mr. Shin is so domineering. You actually regard the astronomical price of 700 million as a child's game. Amazing. No wonder you are the overlord of the South. As he spoke, he turned his head again and glanced at Li Yundong intentionally or unintentionally with a sarcastic smile on his face. Seeing this, Su Chan was so angry that her cheeks puffed up. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she saw Shenwan Kai nodding to her with a smile. Miss Su Chan, we meet again? Su Chan had to swallow the words that rushed to her mouth. She stretched out her hand gracefully and shook hands with Shenwan Kai, saying, Mr. Shin, congratulations. Shenwan Kai smiled slightly. He turned his face to look at Li Yundong and said, Child Li, I have a presumptuous request. Please agree. Before Li Yundong could speak, Rong Guofa was stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Yundong incredulously and thought to himself, who on earth is this guy? Why is Mr. Shin so polite to him? Li Yundong laughed and said, Mr. Shin, just say it. Just because of what you said just now, I will also. Before Li Yundong could finish his words, he heard Ziyuan whispering to him in private, Li Yundong, don't be in a hurry to agree to him. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, but he changed his words and said, just because of what you said just now, I will also think about it. Shenwan Kai didn't doubt him and laughed. He turned around and walked to the auction platform. After saying a few words in private with the auctioneer, The auctioneer suddenly looked shocked and asked Shen Wankai carefully several times in disbelief. It was not until Shen Wankai was a little impatient that he picked up the microphone, coughed dryly, and said to everyone present, "Ladies and gentlemen, now I want to announce something amazing. Mr. Shen Wankai, who has just bid for the Medicine King tripod at a sky-high price of 700 million yuan, has decided to give such a sky-high treasure to Mr. Li Yundong. Let's witness all of this together." As soon as the auctioneer's voice fell, there was an uproar. Almost everyone in the cultivation sects was stunned. What? Zhang Ling could hardly believe her ears. 700 million yuan. Just like that. Zhou Ping was tongue-tied and dumbfounded. Li Yundong himself was also stunned, but he quickly reacted and looked at Zi Yuan. When their eyes met, Zi Yuan nodded slightly to him. Li Yundong immediately sneered and thought to himself, "This Shen Wankai is really good at playing tricks. I told him before that spending a lot of money is good for cultivation, and now he has done such a thing. I have no choice but to accept him as a disciple. Hey, what a good trick." Su Chan and Zhou Qin were not fools. They quickly reacted and looked at Li Yundong with worry in their eyes. They all knew Li Yundong's character very well. He could be persuaded but not cowed. He was frank and straightforward in his words and deeds. He liked to be straightforward and didn't like to beat around the bush. Shen Wansai's way of beating around the bush was not small. Although it could be said that he had put in a lot of effort, it just happened to violate Li Yundong's taboo. If he wanted to take credit for this matter and wanted to be apprenticed, then Shen Wankai would have made a wrong calculation. Rong Guofa didn't know about the twists and turns. He stared at Li Yundong as if he had seen an alien and stammered, "You, who are you?" Hearing his words, Su Chan turned her head and said very seriously, "Don't you remember what I once said to you? Remember, his name is Li Yundong. I once said that in less than 2 years he would definitely become a famous figure in the world. And you will never be able to compare with him." After that, Su Chan snorted and turned her face away, her face full of pride. At this time Tuki, who was not far away, whispered to Sanji Tsunekatsu, "Changxing, what should we do now? This Medicine King tripod has fallen into the hands of Li Yundong." Sanji Tsunekatsu turned his face and stared at Shen Wankai, who was holding the Medicine King tripod with both hands and calmly taking pictures in front of the cameras of the media. He sneered and said, "Since we can't bid for it, it seems that this matter can't be good. We can only use force. Tuki, get ready. I'm going to steal the Medicine King tripod under the eyes of the Chinese cultivators." Chapter 6:15. When Tuki heard Sanji Tsunekatsu's words, he was shocked. He said in surprise, "Changxing, are you crazy? There are several Jinshin masters here." Sanji Tsunekatsu smiled coldly and said, "When the enemy thinks they have won, it is the beginning of their failure. Do you think I don't know that there are Jinshin masters here? In a while you will use the Shikigami to make a little noise nearby. As long as there is chaos, the auction house will definitely immediately put away all these auction items, and the cultivators here should not be allowed to follow them in. Go to the internet. 7KOM. As long as this Medicine King tripod can get out of the sight of these cultivators, I have a way to get it away." Tuki was stunned for a moment. He said worriedly, "But Changxing, if you do this, will it cause mutual hatred and confrontation between the Chinese and Japanese cultivators?" Sanji Tsunekatsu turned his face ferocious. He stared at Tuki coldly, suppressed his anger and growled in a low voice, "Tuki, come with me." Tuki was frightened by Sanji Tsunekatsu's appearance and took a step back, but he quickly lowered his head and whispered, "Yes, Changxing." Sanji Tsunekatsu took Tuki to a bathroom. After he was sure that there was no one inside, he suddenly turned around, holding a vajra in one hand and a mantra finger in the other, and pushed it in front of Tuki. Tuki was about 1.75 meters tall and he was not thin, but when he was pushed in the air by Sanji Tsunekatsu, his whole body suddenly flew up and hit the wall behind him. The tile wall was dented, and for a moment the white tiles fell down. Sanji Tsunekatsu roared angrily, "You idiot! Since Li Yundong defeated Miss Tachibana Wakako, the two sides have been enemies. Now Masako Tachibana has been forced into a corner by the other sects of the new meaning school and the ancient meaning school. She must defeat Li Yundong in public to save her face. Otherwise, we will kneel down in the hands of those idiots who changed the doctrine." Tuki felt as though he was being pressed against the wall by an invisible hand. He was in so much pain that he could not speak. He could only speak intermittently, I understand. Lord Changxing, quickly let me go. I will do as you say." Saionji Tsunekatsu retracted his hand slightly, and the anger on his face dissipated slightly. He snorted coldly and said, "If you know, hurry up and do it outside. Make some noise." As soon as Saionji Tsunekatsu finished speaking, he frowned and waved his fingers. The door of the bathroom closed automatically with a bang. Coincidentally, a man was rushing to the washroom, but he couldn't open the door no matter how hard he tried. Saionji Tsunekatsu stared at the door for a while. When he saw that the people who tried to enter the door had left and stopped trying to open the door, he turned his face and stared at Tuki. Tuki rubbed his chest. He did not dare to be negligent. He quickly took out a few talismans from his pocket. One hand was pinching his fingers, and the other hand was holding the talismans with his index and middle fingers. He put them across his chest and recited a spell in a low voice. As soon as he recited the spell, the two talismans burned with a bang. Black smoke came out of the talismans and drilled out through the crack in the door of the washroom. Just as Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki were hiding in the washroom and plotting, Shinyu surrounded Shin Wankai like a fly and said, "Dad, the company doesn't have much liquidity now. Where can we get 700 million yuan? Dad, 700 million yuan to buy such a thing? It's okay if you buy it yourself. Why did you give it to an outsider? Dad, I'm talking to you. Please, I'm your son, your only son. Can you take a look at me? I also have a share of the property of this family. You can't mess around like this, can you?" Shinyu's last words stimulated Shin Wankai. He reluctantly smiled at the people who came to congratulate him and compliment him. Then he turned around and pulled Shinyu to a deserted corner with a normal face. His face suddenly changed, he gritted his teeth and said angrily, "You know, everything in this family is made by me, Shin Wankai, alone. Without me there would be no you in this world. Without me you would not have the luxury you have now. Don't think you're great just because you've done a few business worth millions. Let me tell you, without me you're nothing. If it weren't for my face, for the sake of the country I've fought for with my own hands, would they cooperate with an idiot like you?" Shin Wankai mercilessly scolded his son, who hated iron for not becoming steel. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Do you think your wings are hard now? How dare you talk to me like this? Let me tell you, even if I lose all my property one day, I won't leave you a penny. When you start from scratch and lay down such a large foundation as mine, you can tell me that you also have a share of the property of this family." Shinyu was stunned by Shin Wansai's scolding. For a moment, he was stunned on the spot and couldn't come back to his senses. In his mind, he really couldn't understand why his father would rather spend 700 million yuan to buy an inexplicable Medicine King tripod than leave a penny for him? Why was his father willing to give the 700 million yuan item to an outsider instead of giving more money to his own son? Wasn't he his own son? Shinyu trembled all over and looked at his father in disbelief, as if he were looking at a stranger. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. Suddenly he turned around and looked at Li Jiandong fiercely. Seeing this, Shin Wankai immediately shouted, "If you dare to act recklessly, I will immediately break off the relationship between father and son." Shinyu's whole body shook violently. He looked back at Shin Wankai in despair. The corner of his mouth twitched, revealing a bitter smile. He laughed, turned around and rushed out of the auction hall while laughing. Shin Wansai's eyes were fixed on Shinyu's figure, and his whole body was trembling slightly. At this time Shin Hui also came over and said cautiously, "Old master, don't be angry with my brother." Shin Wankai said in a tired and low voice, "Don't mention him if you still have a little filial piety." Shin Hui obediently closed her mouth and didn't say anything. Shin Wankai seemed to have aged dozens of years in an instant. His face was haggard and wrinkled. He covered his chest, his face full of pain, and his body fell back little by little. Seeing this, Shin Hui immediately held him up and shouted, "Help, help." As soon as Shin Hui's voice fell, she heard a calm and magnetic voice next to her. "Don't worry, let me see." Shin Hui turned her head and saw Li Jiandong holding Shin Wansai's hand and talking to her calmly. She knew that Li Jiandong was a strange man with divine skills. In addition, he had once saved Shin Wansai's life, so she didn't dare to show her temper in front of Li Jiandong. Shin Hui asked anxiously, "How is the old man?" As Li Jiandong slowly transferred his jinchi to Shin Wankai, he said in a low voice, "Mr. Shin is fine. He's just angry and his qi and blood are not enough." Shin Hui asked in confusion, "But after you saved the old man last time, wasn't he very good? I think he was more than 10 years younger at that time. Why did he suddenly become like this?" Li Jiandong sighed softly and said, "Mr. Shin is now in a declining body. All parts of his body and organs are relatively weak. If he goes down, it will be the stage of failure and death. At this stage, people can rely on elixirs to protect themselves for a while, but it is unlikely that one pill can make him return to his youth, let alone completely change his physique. Shen Hui looked at Li Jiandong without understanding. She remembered the magic of this boy, and then remembered that her father had spent a lot of money to buy the Medicine King tripod, and then wanted to give it to the boy in front of her. Suddenly, her heart moved as if she had understood something, and there were a few clear lights in her eyes. Li Jiandong's jinqi was pure and vigorous. After only a while, Shen Wancai's complexion was obviously better. He let out a long breath, smiled at Li Jiandong gratefully and said, "Child Li, you saved my life again. I really don't know how to thank you." Li Jiandong smiled slightly and said, "It's nothing. You don't have to thank me. What's more, Mr. Shin took back the Medicine King tripod from the Japanese. I should be the one to thank." Shen Wancai held Li Jiandong's hand tightly and asked nervously, "Child Li, you haven't answered my presumptuous request just now." Li Jiandong thought for a while, sighed softly and said, "Mr. Shin, your gift is too expensive. I can't accept it." Shen Wancai had experienced many vicissitudes of life and had rich experience. When he saw Li Jiandong's hesitation, he immediately understood. He sighed and said bitterly, "Child Li, you saw it just now. I only have one son. I expected him to become a talent and inherit my family business in the future. But I didn't expect. Alas, I can't help him." At this time, Shen Wancai also seemed to have put aside the knot in his heart. Regardless of the presence of Shen Hui, he said to Li Jiandong sincerely, "Child Li, I know that you must not be immortal. I also know that if I do this, you will definitely be unhappy in your heart. But I really have no choice. My only son is so useless. In the future, if the family business is handed over to him, how can I rest assured? I'm already half a body in the ground. In the past, the only hope was that this son could become a talent, but now the only hope I have is that you, Child Li, can teach me the magic of immortals. Even if I can't live forever, I can at least live a few more years. Is such a request too much?" When Shen Wancai spoke of his sadness, not only were his eyes full of tears, but Shen Hui also looked sad. She whispered comforting words to Shen Wancai while crying. Li Jiandong originally had a lot of unhappiness in his heart, but at this time he couldn't help but dissipate a lot. He sighed softly, smiled slightly and said, "I understand. Let me think about it for 2 days, okay? 2 days later, I will definitely give you an answer." There was a hopeful look in Shen Wancai's eyes. He straightened his body slightly and said in a trembling voice, "Child Li, I'll wait for your news." Li Jiandong smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly heard a loud bang coming from not far away, followed by a sharp scream. "Murder, murder." At this time, some of the cultivators who had not left the auction house looked in the direction of the sound in surprise. Su Chan curiously approached Li Jiandong and whispered, "Who is tired of living and making trouble here?" As she said this, the little girl raised her head and blinked her eyes. "Yundong, do you want to go and see what's going on?" Li Jiandong smiled slightly. "Okay." Just as he was about to continue speaking, he saw that the people of the auction house were all nervous. They asked the security guards to escort the Medicine King tripod to the backstage. At the same time, they shouted at Shen Wancai to let him go with them. Shen Wancai said to Li Jiandong, "Child Li, why don't you go with me?" Li Jiandong looked around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at him intentionally or unintentionally. He knew that he was already in the teeth of the storm at this time, so he didn't want to be so ostentatious, so he said, "No, if you are worried about safety, let Ziyuan and Zhou Qin accompany you. With them here it will be fine." At this time Ao Wushuang also said, "Leader, you go. I'll help you keep an eye on it. It will be fine." Li Jiandong originally wanted Ao Wushuang to stay as well. At this time, seeing that she had taken the initiative to volunteer, he was immediately overjoyed and said, "That's great. With Senior Ao Wushuang I can rest assured." Chapter 616. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin and Ao Wushuang accompanied Shen Wancai to the inner hall of the auction house. Just as they were about to enter, the head of security of the auction house stopped Ziyuan and the others. After looking Ziyuan, Zhou Qin and Ao Wushuang up and down, his eyes flashed with amazement. He turned to Shen Wancai and asked, "May I ask who they are?" "Mr. Shen, only you can go in with us. Let's go." Although Shen Wancai didn't know who Ao Wushuang was, nor did he know what kind of ability Zhou Qin, the daughter of a noble family, had, he knew Ziyuan's ability. Moreover, Li Jiandong valued Ao Wushuang so much that he had to speak up to protect her. He smiled and said, "They are my protectors. Let them go in with us." The person in charge sneered in his heart and thought to himself, "Do you think you are Gaddafi? Get a large group of beautiful bodyguards? I think they are your mistresses, right?" He shook his head and said, "No, Mr. Shen, only you can go in alone." Shen Wankai frowned secretly and looked a little unhappy. Just as he was about to speak, Zhou Qin asked, "The Medicine King tripod is such an important thing. If it is lost or robbed, can you bear the responsibility?" The person in charge sneered and said, "Do you know what we used to do? If we can't control it, can you?" Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she suddenly heard a loud bang coming from the inner hall, followed by a few screams. The face of the head of security suddenly changed. He couldn't care less about Zhou Qin and the others. He turned around and rushed to the inner hall behind him. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and quickly followed him in. As soon as the two of them rushed into the inner hall, they found several uniformed security guards sitting limply in the corner of the wall. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. There was an obvious dent in the wall behind them. It was obvious that they had been thrown out like a sandbag and smashed against the wall. At this time, the Medicine King tripod was stored on a display stand, protected by a thick bulletproof glass cover. It was safe and sound. The head of security was about to breathe a sigh of relief when he suddenly heard a loud crash. The hard and thick glass cover instantly shattered, as if it had been slapped by an invisible hand. As soon as the glass cover was smashed, the Medicine King tripod floated up out of thin air. The head of security was shocked when he saw this. He pulled out the pistol from his waist and was about to shoot. But there was nothing in front of him. The Medicine King tripod was also floating in the air. Or was there anyone? Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly felt a strong gust of wind, as if he was pushed by a giant hand. Then his whole body flew out and hit the wall with a loud bang. Then his body softly fell to the ground. Zhou Qin's eyes widened and she shouted in a low voice, "Goddess Nyan Seal?" She quickly pulled out the Vulcan's whip wrapped around her waist and shook her wrist. The long whip made a loud sound of breaking through the air and lashed in the direction of the Medicine King tripod. With a pot sound, the Vulcan's whip suddenly hit something. The tip of the Vulcan's whip instantly refracted a faint ripple, so that Zhou Qin and others could vaguely recognize that it was an invisible man about 2 meters tall. But as soon as Zhou Qin whipped him, the invisible man's figure disappeared in an instant, and he rushed towards the window with a howl. "Oh no, he's going to steal the Medicine King tripod!" Ziyuan suddenly shouted, "Stop him!" A purple light flashed beside Ziyuan in an instant, and the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk instantly appeared in front of the invisible man like a big net. With a muffled sound, the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk seemed to have been hit heavily by a huge palm in an instant, forming a terrible claw print. Ziyuan saw that the hand was tightly wrapped by the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk, so it showed traces. The fingers of this hand were thick and long, and the nails were as sharp as bayonets. The muscles on the arm were even more bumpy, like a sack full of potatoes. It didn't look like a human arm at all. With a move of her mind, Ziyuan quickly controlled the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk to extend quickly, entangling the invisible humanoid monster. With a schwatch sound, the Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand was also thrown out, and it tightly wrapped around his ankle. As soon as her Vulcan's whip was wrapped around, there was a burst of fire at one end of the Vulcan's whip with a bang, constantly burning the invisible monster. The monster seemed to know that he couldn't escape. He took a deep breath and roared in the direction of the glass window. Howl? The invisible monster's mouth fiercely emitted a shockwave. This loud roar suddenly shook the entire building. Shen Wankai was knocked out without saying a word. Although the glass window that bore the brunt of the impact was hard-tempered glass, it was shaken by the strong shock wave and immediately shattered with a crash. The invisible monster held the Medicine King cauldron in its other hand and threw it out. At the moment he threw it out, his upper body was completely entangled by the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk, and his lower body and ankles began to burn with raging fire. For a moment the monster let out a terrible howl, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a black smoke and disappeared. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin's faces changed greatly, and they said in unison, "Oh no, it's the Medicine King tripod." At the moment when the Medicine King tripod was thrown out, a figure flashed past them, and Ao Wushuang chased after it like lightning. In the blink of an eye, Ao Wushuang chased after the Medicine King tripod. She reached out to take it, but suddenly felt a terrible force coming from behind her. This force was not only fierce, but also full of powerful Buddhist power, which happened to restrain her demon power. She suddenly shivered and quickly dodged. Ao Wushuang's figure flashed, and a golden light immediately flashed in her original position. This golden light did not stop. In an instant, it passed through the Medicine King tripod and pulled it to the horizon. Ao Wushuang was furious. She gritted her teeth and was about to chase after it, but suddenly her heart moved as if she had thought of something. For a moment she couldn't help but hesitate. The battle between masters only lasted for an instant. As Ao Wushuang hesitated, the Medicine King tripod and the golden light instantly disappeared into the horizon. At this time it was too late to chase after them. Ao Wushuang's eyes flickered as she looked in the direction where the Medicine King tripod had disappeared. She snorted coldly to herself, and her figure flashed and she instantly returned to the inner hall. When Ziyuan and Zhou Qin saw that Ao Wushuang had returned in the blink of an eye with empty hands, their hearts suddenly thumped, and at the same time, an ominous thought flashed through their minds. Zhou Qin was shocked and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, where is the Medicine King tripod?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and sighed. "I didn't catch up." Ziyuan couldn't help but be moved. "Even you didn't catch up? Who the hell is this person?" Ao Wushuang's expression was a little unnatural. She was about to speak when she saw many people rushing into the room. There were cultivators from various sects, Shen Wansai's daughter, Shen Hui, Li Yundong and Su Chan. What happened? Li Yundong looked at the messy scene in the room in shock. Su Chan glanced around and asked subconsciously, "Have you been robbed?" Seeing that Su Chan's subconscious words had hit the nail on the head, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Ao Wushuang walked up to Li Yundong and said with a look of shame, "Leader, I failed to live up to your trust and let someone take away the Medicine King tripod in front of me." "What? The Medicine King tripod was taken away?" When the others in the room heard this, they almost jumped up and shouted in surprise. Some cultivators from the cultivation sects pointed at Ao Wushuang and took the opportunity to attack her. "What are you doing? You can't even keep an eye on such an important thing as the Medicine King tripod. Ao Wushuang, tell me, did you take it for yourself? Ao Wushuang, were you instructed by Li Yundong?" Ao Wushuang's face was as cold as frost, and the anger between her eyebrows was getting stronger and stronger. Just as she was about to lose her temper, Li Yundong suddenly turned his head and shouted angrily, "Shut up!" Although Li Yundong's voice was not very loud, it contained the power of a Buddhist staff. Everyone only felt a buzzing sound in their ears as if thousands of bells were ringing at the same time, shaking the qi and blood in their chests. The people who had been noisy before were suddenly shocked and shut their mouths one after another. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, also said angrily, "You idiots! Just now Mr. Shen wanted to give my master the Medicine King tripod, but my master didn't immediately agree. What reason does he have to steal it?" This question made everyone speechless for a while. Some of those who wanted to find fault with him also snorted and didn't say anything. Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He took a deep breath and asked Ziyuan in a low voice what had happened. After pondering for a while, he said angrily, "Damn it, we fell into the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain and creating a ruckus in the east while attacking in the west." Ziyuan asked in a low voice, "Did someone on your side make it on purpose just now?" Li Yundong nodded. "The movement there just now attracted the attention of almost all cultivators. When we went over to take a look, we saw an invisible monster running amok. After we subdued it, we heard some movement from your side, and then the Medicine King tripod was lost." As Li Yundong spoke, he gritted his teeth and said, "There are so many cultivators here, but they can take things away under our noses. Good method, good method. What a daring person. Who on earth is so bold?" At this time Ao Wushuang also came over and whispered, "I know who it is." Li Yundong immediately raised his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Who?" Ao Wushuang shook her head. "Let's go back and talk. It's not convenient to talk here." Li Yundong nodded. He walked to Shen Hui's side and whispered a few words, asking her to take good care of Shen Wan Kai. Then he walked out with Su Chan and the others. Seeing this, Zhou Ping couldn't help whispering to Zhang Ling, "Master, are we just going to let them go like this? This matter is very strange." Zhang Ling raised her hand and said in a deep voice, "Let them go. They didn't do it." Zhou Ping was stunned. "Why?" Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong with bright eyes and sneered. "With Li Yundong's current strength and the situation just now, there's no need for him to play such a trick." Hearing Zhang Ling's words, Li Yundong turned his face to look at Zhang Ling, nodded and then turned to leave. Zhengyi school was not only a leading figure in the Taoist cultivation world, but also had a great influence in the Buddhist cultivation world. As soon as Zhang Ling spoke, the cultivators of all sects on the scene no longer stopped them and made way for them. Li Yundong and the others filed out. Just as they were about to leave, the police who had been arranged around the auction house rushed over. A leading policeman shouted at Li Yundong, "Hey, you can't leave. You are all suspects. You have to stay and make statements." This was the second time yesterday. Chapter 617. Li Yundong frowned and turned around to take a look. This look was not angry, but it was powerful. The policeman's heart beat inexplicably, and he swallowed all the words he wanted to say. Zhou Qin had been entrusted by Li Yundong to take care of Shen Wankai, but Shen Wankai had been knocked unconscious under her nose, and the Medicine King tripod had been snatched away. She had nowhere to vent her anger. At this time, seeing that someone had come to provoke her, she immediately turned her head and shouted at the policeman, "If you have the ability, try to keep us here. Call your director here and see if he dares to say such a thing to me." The policeman was shocked by Zhou Qin's tone, but he soon became furious. He had been paid a lot of money to be responsible for the security of the auction, but he hadn't expected such a problem to occur. Now he was looking for someone to take the blame, but he hadn't expected that someone would come to his door and dare to fight against him. Just as he was about to act, a policeman immediately came over and whispered in his ear, "Hey, Captain Sun, it seems to be Governor Zhou's daughter. Don't mess around." Captain Sun was stunned and said in a low voice, "Governor Zhou's daughter? Zhou Kachang?" In China, if one wanted to be a qualified public official, or if one wanted to be promoted smoothly, it was necessary to know the names and positions of leaders at all levels and some of their immediate family members. They could have all kinds of misunderstandings and conflicts with ordinary people countless times, but they could never have a misunderstanding and conflict with their superiors. Because if they offended the people, no matter how serious the consequences were, they would at most be dismissed and transferred. After the situation calmed down, they could be quietly promoted back. But if they offended the leaders, they would never be able to get ahead in their lives. Captain Sun looked at Zhou Qin carefully and saw that the girl in front of him was full of heroic spirit. Her eyes were tough and domineering. It was obvious that she had been in a high position for a long time. No matter how good an actor was, he or she would not be able to put on such a show. Captain Sun's anger disappeared. He said with an apologetic smile, "It turns out to be Governor Zhou's daughter. I'm sorry." The flood rushed to the Dragon King Temple. Seeing that he had given in, Zhou Qin didn't want to pester him anymore. She snorted coldly and turned around to leave. But at this time Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping also walked out. Zhou Ping sneered and said, "How impressive. If you were half as powerful as you are now, how could the Medicine King tripod have been snatched away?" Zhou Qin's face suddenly turned red. She was furious and wanted to refute, but on second thought she realized that it was indeed the case. This proud and arrogant young lady was so angry that she couldn't speak. She stood rooted to the ground, her eyes filled with unwillingness and anger. Li Yundong glanced at Zhou Ping with a sullen face, then turned to Zhou Qin and said softly, "It's my fault. It's my mistake, it has nothing to do with you. This person can take away the Medicine King tripod under the eyes of you, Zi Yuan, and Senior Ao Wu Shuang, which means that this person must not be ordinary. And those who dare to snatch the Medicine King tripod in this situation must have an extremely deep background." As Li Yundong spoke, he glanced at Zhou Ping intentionally or unintentionally. Zhou Ping suddenly jumped up like a rabbit whose tail had been stepped on and shouted, "What are you looking at? What do you mean?" Zhang Ling reached out to stop Zhou Ping. She snorted and said, "Jinren Li, there's no need to say such meaningful words. Yes, in terms of strength and background, the most suspicious one here is indeed our Jingyi school, but our Jingyi school is righteous, stable, and has a clear conscience. This Medicine King tripod is the supreme powerful magical weapon of our Taoist school, and it is also a treasure left by our ancestors. As juniors we don't cherish it but we lose it. It doesn't seem good? In my opinion, every cultivation sect has the responsibility to find it back. What do you think?" Li Yundong saw that Zhang Ling's words were dignified, but there was no mention of whether or not it would be returned to its original owner after it was found. Moreover, her subtext was, now that the Medicine King tripod has become an ownerless object, whoever gets it will naturally belong to whoever gets it. This sentence hit a deep trap. If Li Yundong followed Zhang Ling's words, he was afraid that he would immediately fall into the trap and suffer a great loss. But Li Yundong's mind moved and he understood the key point. He smiled slightly and said in the same dignified manner, Zhenren Zhang, you're right. The Medicine King tripod is the supreme powerful magical weapon of our Taoist school, and everyone has the responsibility to find it back. But since the Medicine King tripod was lost under our noses, it should be found by us. What do you think? Zhang Ling saw that Li Yundong had easily resolved her words, which were full of traps and deep pits, and at the same time kicked a ball over. There was a needle hidden in the silk floss, and there was a hidden meaning in his words. It was very difficult to deal with him. Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong for a long time. Suddenly she put on a fake smile and said, Zhenren Li, take care of yourself. Li Yundong also smiled and cupped his hands. Zhenren Zhang, goodbye. After that he turned around and left with Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang and Chris. Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong's back. After a long time she sighed secretly and shook her head. Amazing, really amazing. Zhou Ping also looked in the direction in which Li Yundong and the others had left and sneered. Even the Medicine King tripod can't be guarded. What's so amazing about it? Zhang Ling shook her head and said, no, the other party is also a master. When masters fight, they must fight for the first opportunity. Whoever can seize the first opportunity will win. So this is not the fault of the battle. If it were us, we would also be trapped. Zhou Ping asked curiously, Master, what do you think about him? Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong's figure that had gone far away and sighed. This Li Yundong came out of nowhere half a year ago. When he first made his debut he was very young and inexperienced. When he talked to me just now he already had some of the demeanor of a real leader. Hey, it's not surprising that he has such a cultivation quotient at such a young age, but what's surprising is that he reacted so quickly just now. He was able to perceive my intention so quickly and counterattack. For a young man of his age, it's really incredible and commendable that his words and actions are so watertight. Zhou Ping curled her lips disapprovingly. So what? Isn't he just a leader of a group of evildoers? Thousands of years later the world will only know what our Jingyi school is like, but who will know what Li Yundong is like? Zhang Ling chuckled and said meaningfully, you idiot. He is still the leader of the Fox Zen school. You should be happy. Zhou Ping was tongue-tied. Master, what do you mean? Zhang Ling said, no matter how powerful Li Yundong is, it's impossible for him to transform the Fox Zen school into a cultivation sect that can stand side by side with us. Because the Fox Zen school has been notorious for thousands of years, this is no longer something that can be reversed by individual strength. But if Li Yundong creates his own sect, hey, I dare say that he will definitely become a great master and become our great enemy. Although Zhou Ping had heard Zhang Ling's comments on Li Yundong more or less, this was the first time she had heard her master praise this cultivator who had a deep grudge against their Jingyi school. Zhou Ping opened her mouth wide and wanted to refute, but she didn't know how to say it. After a long time she snorted and said, let's wait and see. After Li Yundong and the others returned to their home in Tianan City, as soon as they entered the door, Li Yundong's face immediately fell. Someone had dared to steal the Medicine King tripod under his nose. This really made him feel like he had lost all face. When the little foxes at home saw Li Yundong and the others coming back, they also surrounded them curiously. They were about to chatter and ask about the auction, but they saw that Li Yundong's face was as dark as a dark cloud, as if thunder would break out at any time. All of a sudden, none of them dared to speak and hid to the side in a low voice. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, immediately bent her knees and was about to kneel down to admit her mistake. Li Yundong immediately stopped her with his hand and said in a deep voice, Zhou Qin, as I said, this matter is not your fault but mine. As he said this, Li Yundong turned his face and said to Ao Wushuang, Senior Ao Wushuang, you said that you know who took the Medicine King tripod? Who is it? Ao Wushuang hesitated for a moment and said, I'm not sure, but according to my deduction, it's very likely that it's someone from Jinyin Tantrism. Someone from Jinyin Tantrism? Li Yundong was stunned. He quickly clapped his fists and said angrily, yes, it must be them. I think it's very likely to be Saionji Tsunekatsu. Did they steal the Medicine King tripod to lure me to Japan? Ziyuan also nodded slightly and said, it's very possible. From a logical point of view it makes sense. Moreover, before and after that, Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki were nowhere to be seen. Zhou Qin had been holding back her anger before, and at this time she couldn't help but shout angrily, Master, let's go and burn this Mount Koya. Ziyuan burst into laughter and horror and shook her head repeatedly. No, Zhou Qin, don't be impulsive. Mount Koya is not a place for fun. In Japan, the status of Mount Koya in the Japanese cultivation world is equivalent to that of Taoism in Mount Longhu and Buddhism in Mount Wutai. You can't act recklessly. Otherwise you will go in standing and come out horizontally. Zhou Qin said angrily, then are we just going to swallow this anger? As she said this, she turned to Chris and said, Chris, you judge. If it were you, would you be able to swallow this anger? Seeing that the group of people were excited, Chris felt that she was an outsider, so she didn't dare to say anything. She just forced a smile and didn't say anything. Seeing that she couldn't get any help from Chris, Zhou Qin turned to Su Chan and said, Su Chan, what do you think? Su Chan blinked her eyes and looked at Li Yundong. Her eyes seemed to be saying, I'll listen to Yundong. I'll do what he says. At this time, everyone's eyes were on Li Yundong. Li Yundong's face was gloomy. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw a letter slowly floating in from outside the balcony. Hey, there's a letter. Su Chan also quickly found it. She shouted curiously. The letter slowly floated down on the tea table in the living room as if someone was holding it. Everyone took a look and saw that the envelope was exactly the same as the challenge sent by Sayonji Tsunekatsu last time. The paper was full of cherry blossoms. Zhou Qin walked to the tea table in 3 steps, picked up the envelope, and handed it to Li Yundong with a sneer. Master, I bet this must be another challenge. Li Yundong calmly took out the letter. After reading a few lines, he flew into a rage. He suddenly crumpled the letter into a ball and shouted angrily, the Japanese have gone too far. How dare they use such despicable means? Do they really think I'm weak and easy to bully? Seeing this, Ziyuan squatted down and picked up the ball of paper. As soon as she spread out the letter, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang, and the little foxes also came over curiously. They saw that the handwriting on the letter was domineering, and the words were full of pride. The letter read, Li Yundong, I've long heard of your reputation as a great Jinren, but I haven't seen you for a long time. I had to take the risk and come up with this plan to see the true face of Jinren Li. However, I did not expect that none of the Chinese cultivators in the hall would be able to stop me in the slightest. Apart from being shocked, I am greatly disappointed. I can't imagine that the cultivation world of China, which was a country of 10,000 countries, was actually so incompetent. Although I'm the young monk of Rigoino, I feel deeply ashamed of the cultivation world of your country. I've been begging Jinren Li for a long time, but I can't get him. Is that the reason? If Jinren Li feels that there is no hope of winning, you can say it frankly. Reputation is just a worldly possession. Why do you care? If Jinren Li still has a bit of courage, you can go to Mount Koya in 7 days to retrieve the Medicine King tripod of your Chinese cultivation world. No matter who wins or loses, I will return the Medicine King tripod to Jinren Li. But if Jinren Li is too timid to come, then this Medicine King tripod will be a powerful magical weapon of our Yamato people. When everyone saw this, they immediately became angry and became bold. This was not a challenge, it was clearly a provocation. Chapter 6:18. Before Su Chan and Zhou Qin finished reading, they immediately shouted in anger. Su Chan said angrily, this Japanese guy is so arrogant. Yundong, you must teach them a good lesson. Zhou Qin was so angry that her 2 willowy eyebrows stood up. B*****. It's too hateful. How dare he look down on me like this? Although Ziyuan's eyes were full of anger, she quickly calmed down and said to Li Yundong, this is a provocation. Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, don't I know that this Japanese guy is provoking me? Hey, he wants me to go so much. Fine. I'll do as he wishes. With that, Li Yundong turned his head and shouted at Su Chan, go get a pen and paper. Su Chan immediately responded, turned her head and rushed into the room. After a while, she ran out quickly with the 4 treasures of the study, ink, paper and inkstone. Li Yundong turned to Ziyuan and said, Ziyuan, you write it. Since they challenged me, well, write a challenge and give it back to them. Seeing this, Su Chan immediately ran to one side and said, Sister Ziyuan, I'll help you grind the ink. Seeing that Li Yundong was angry at this time, Ziyuan sighed softly and didn't try to persuade him anymore. She walked up gracefully, grabbed her sleeve with one hand and held the brush with the other. She turned her head to look at Li Yundong and asked, what do you want to write? Li Yundong said angrily, write as you see fit. If I write it, it will definitely be full of swearing words. Ziyuan couldn't help laughing. She shook her head and raised the brush to write, but when the tip of the brush fell on the white paper, she hesitated again. This kind of challenge could not be written randomly. It was very particular about the words and sentences. Moreover, when it was sent to the other side it would definitely be recorded. Maybe it would become a historical material thousands of years later. If she didn't pay attention to her words, it would cause future generations to gossip about her. Ziyuan was born to worry too much. Her habitual hesitation made Li Yundong, who was beside her, a little impatient. This reincarnated wisdom king, who was usually calm and composed and could not be moved by the wind, was indeed enraged by the aggressiveness of Xinyan tantrism again and again. Li Yundong saw that Ziyuan had been holding the brush for a long time. He walked over and unceremoniously snatched the brush from Ziyuan's hand. He waved the brush and wrote 6 big words, "If you want to fight, then let's fight." After Li Yundong finished writing, he didn't even look at it. He turned his head and said to Ziyuan, "Why are you thinking so much? Since the other party was being polite, we should naturally reply politely. If the other party is arrogant and rude, are we supposed to be polite? Sometimes you are so kind that there is no limit to your kindness. Wrap this letter in the simplest envelope and send it over." Ziyuan saw that the words written by Li Yundong were crooked. It was really a kind of praise to describe them with the words, "Ghost Drawing Peach Talisman." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "I'm not being polite to them. I'm just worried that I'll lose your face if I don't write it well. Besides, aren't you afraid that other sects will laugh at you for taking a simple envelope?" Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, "It's good that I didn't write it on toilet paper. If they annoy me, I'll write it on a piece of paper and send it to them one day. They only deserve to see this." Su Chan and Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. Ao Wushuang also shook her head and said with a smile, "Child's temper, nonsense, really nonsense." Ziyuan looked like she wanted to laugh but was too embarrassed to do so. She looked at Li Yundong's crooked words and said, "Well, since you're happy, let's do it this way. But, are you sure you want to send these words over?" At this time, Su Chan and Zhou Qin also came over to take a look curiously. Both of them were excellent women, so they were naturally very particular about the way of writing. They saw that Li Yundong's words were crooked, and the most important thing was that the first few words were long and thin. The last word, Zhan, had been written by Li Yundong like 2 words, Zhan and Go. It looked strange and really unsightly. Su Chan couldn't help but burst into laughter, but soon she covered her mouth and looked at Li Yundong with a frightened and nervous face, for fear that he would blame her and spank her. The corners of Zhou Qin's mouth also curled up as if she couldn't help laughing, but she quickly held it back. Her face was full of bitterness, hatred, and pain. Li Yundong naturally knew what his handwriting was like. He had been in a fit of anger just now, so how could he care so much? He hadn't expected to make a fool of himself on the spot. His face turned red and he glared at Zhou Qin. "What's with your expression?" Zhou Qin said with a sullen face, "Master, these words of yours are so well written. They really reveal their true feelings from the bottom of their hearts. When people see them, they feel a wave of anger rushing towards them." Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. "Bullshit, bullshit. Are you praising me or scolding me?" At this time, Su Chan, who had been holding back her laughter, finally couldn't help it. She burst out laughing, which immediately made Li Yundong glare at her. "Your words are beautiful. You write it?" Su Chan quickly shook her hands vigorously. "No, no, my words are not suitable for such an angry body." Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, "I'm also a roaring body." As he said this, he turned his head and glared at Zhou Qin. "Come on, stop pretending. You write it? Your words are the most suitable. Just write these 6 words." Zhou Qin tried hard to hold back her laughter. She walked to the table, grabbed her sleeve with one hand and picked up the brush with the other. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down, as if she wanted to cultivate her emotions. Zhou Qin raised her head and closed her eyes, silently reciting the provocation she had just seen. When she opened her eyes again, they were full of anger. She quickly picked up the brush and wrote 6 murderous words. "If you want to fight, then let's fight." Everyone saw that these 6 words were full of killing intent. They were really vertical and horizontal like spears and swords, and the momentum between the lines was majestic. They immediately cheered. Even Chris, an American who didn't understand grass, couldn't help but feel a fierce murderous aura coming towards her, which made her hair stand on end. Li Yundong looked at these 6 words and nodded repeatedly. He said with great satisfaction, "Well, just like that. Send it over." Su Chan asked curiously, "Yundong, can't you just go directly? Why do you have to send someone over?" At this time Ziyuan said with a smile, "That won't do. This is the rule between sections. Although the other party is rude, this kind of etiquette rule can't be abolished." Li Yundong laughed and said, I don't care about these bullshit rules. I just want to reciprocate. It would be impolite of me not to reciprocate. If they dare to provoke me, I will provoke them 100 times more. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up when she heard this. She asked, Master, let me send it? Li Yundong glanced at her and said, You? Zhou Qin chuckled and said, Ziyuan is the future leader of the Linggong sect, and the other party is not the leader. Therefore, according to the principle of reciprocity, Ziyuan can't go. Otherwise it would be a favor to them. Su Chan asked curiously, What about me? Before Zhou Qin could speak, Li Yundong shook his head and said, You? You can't. I don't trust you. Su Chan's mouth suddenly pouted and she looked unhappy. Li Yundong had to explain, It's not that I don't trust you, I just think that your character and strength are not suitable for this matter. You are right, not right. Do you understand? Oh, Su Chan said, pouted and stopped talking. Zhou Qin looked at Ao Wushuang again. Ao Wushuang was a smart person. When she saw Zhou Qin's expression, she knew that she wanted to go, so she took the initiative to say with a smile, I'm even more unsuitable to go. The Japanese cultivation world is one of the mortal enemies of our Fox Zen school. I'm a fox spirit, and more than 10 years ago, I had some conflicts with the Japanese cultivators of various sects in Japan. If I go there, I'm afraid I won't be able to return. Li Yundong asked curiously, Why did you say that? How did the Japanese cultivation world become one of the mortal enemies of the Fox Zen school? Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said with some emotion, Back then, when the mystical silver fox was practicing the 9th phase of the heavenly Jindan technique, she provoked the divine tribulation. At this time, the cultivation world of various sects took the opportunity to besiege her and break her 3 souls and 7 spirits. In order to protect herself, the mystical silver fox threw the life soul of the 3 souls, as well as the 3 souls of the 7 souls, Tianchong, Linghui and Central Center, into the 6 paths of reincarnation. At the same time she transformed the earth soul, the spirit soul, and the power soul into the body of an ordinary fox and fled into the deep mountains and forests. In addition, the rest of her spiritual energy and her memory merged into the remaining heaven soul, essence soul and heroic soul, and fled all the way to the east. After the mystical silver fox fled to Japan, she lurked beside the ruler of Japan at that time, Emperor Nyoyu, in an attempt to recuperate and make a comeback. But what she didn't expect was that there was a very powerful cultivator next to Emperor Nyoyu who discovered her true body. Li Yundong was a little stunned. He couldn't help asking, Wait? Did the mystical silver fox hide in Japan at that time? Ao Wushuang nodded. That's right. Li Yundong asked in surprise, At that time, did the mystical silver fox still change her name to Tamamo no Mei? Ao Wushuang nodded slowly. Yes. Tamamo no Mei was a famous 9-tailed celestial fox in the Japanese cultivation world and even in myths and legends. As for her origin, the Japanese cultivation world unanimously believed that she was a fox demon from China, and then fled to Japan from China. But some people said that she originated from India, but where exactly did she come from was unknown. Although Zhou Qin hadn't cultivated for long and didn't know much about the cultivation world, she was still clear about such a famous mythical figure as Tamamo no Mei. Zhou Qin asked in shock, That's not right. I know that Tamamo no Mei is a 9-tailed celestial fox, but didn't she sneak back to Japan in the Tang dynasty on the ship of the Japanese envoy? Ao Wushuang sneered. It's the same excuse as the Jingyi school and the Jinshan sect. It's just a whitewash. At that time, the imperial palace of Japan was full of masters, but they accidentally let a fox demon sneak in and lurk around the emperor. What a great shame and humiliation it was. If it weren't for the serious illness of the emperor of Bird Feather at that time, which made others suspicious, they wouldn't have been able to find the location of the mystical silver fox in another 100 years. Zhou Qin said strangely, But that's not right. The mystical silver fox followed Ji Bei into the imperial palace. Isn't that shameful? Ao Wushuang said with a smile, At that time, the envoys of the Tang dynasty were extremely respected people. Whether it was Ji Bei or the famous Abe Nakamaro in history, they would be greatly respected when they returned to their country. They had the special treatment of not kneeling when they saw the emperor and not being polite when they saw the princes. At that time, Japan's desire and worship for the culture of the Tang dynasty were crazy and unreasonable. The Japanese once thought that as long as it came from the Tang dynasty, it must be good. Therefore, the people around these envoys of the Tang dynasty would not be investigated. Besides, at that time, the envoys of the Tang dynasty brought back many cultivation magic arts from various sects in the cultivation world of the Tang dynasty. Even if the Japanese cultivators saw them at that time, they would respect them. How could they doubt them? Therefore, if the mystical silver fox really wanted to follow them into the imperial palace, it would be a piece of cake. As Ao Wushuang said this, he sneered and said, "It's a pity that their excuse is decent, but for the discerning people in the cultivation world, it's full of loopholes." Ji Bei returned to China during the period of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty, but in that period our Fox Zen school had not yet been established. Guangong Fa Qin Xiong. Humph, what a joke. Only then did Zhou Qin understand. I see. The one who appeared the mystical silver fox. Is it Abe Yasuo? Ao Wushuang's face suddenly darkened. Yes. The Abe family is the sworn enemy of our Fox Zen school. At that time, it was the Yinyang master Abe Taiching who sealed the soul and spirit of the mystical silver fox in a huge rock. As she said this, Ao Wushuang turned to Li Yundong and said very seriously, "Leader, if you really go to Mount Koya, you must pay attention to the Yinyang master of the Abe family. This is one of the oldest cultivation families in the Japanese cultivation world. It is extremely powerful. You must be careful." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Yinyang master?" Their Yinyang skills were passed down from the 100 schools of thought in the spring and autumn warring states period. I'd like to meet them if I have the chance. As Li Yundong said this, he turned to Zhou Qin and said, "Now it seems that it's indeed the best for you to go. But you have to be careful. Try not to mention our Fox Zen school and pick on their shortcomings. Of course, it's best to put down the letter and leave. There's no need to talk nonsense with them. It's useless to talk to them. If you talk too much, they will think you're afraid. I think the best way to deal with them is still the same word, fight." Seeing that Li Yundong had agreed to go to Mount Koya, Zhou Qin was overjoyed. She nodded heavily and said, "Master, don't worry. I won't let you down." After that, she sneered in her heart and said, "Japanese, just wait and see. My master is magnanimous and won't let me scold people. Humph, I don't have such a good temper. If I don't scold you, I'll take your surname." I suddenly remembered that in chapter 614, a friend pointed out that there was a bug in it. Rongwa didn't buy the ivory Arhat tower, but I made a mistake at that time and wrote that he had bought the ivory tower. Later, after being pointed out by a friend, I have changed it. I hereby sincerely apologize to all of you. I will pay more attention to it in the future. In addition, thank you for the 800 VIP tickets Swordfinger Dongwu generously gave me. I thank you very much. Chapter 619. Early in the morning the next day, Zhou Qin went out early. Because she was going deep into the tiger's den and setting foot in another cultivation world, Zhou Qin had made all the preparations and homework that night. For her safety, Li Jiandong gave the colorful brocade bag and the lioha to Zhou Qin and asked her to take them with her. Bubble. Book. Okay. In order to emphasize her official background, Zhou Qin did not fly to Mount Koya all the way with her young spirit body. Instead, she chose to take a train to Shanghai first, and then take a plane to Osaka. Mount Koya was located in Koya Town, Edo County, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. After arriving in Osaka by plane, Zhou Qin took a train to Mount Koya, and finally took a cable car up the mountain. Because it was the transition between late winter and early spring, there was a heavy snow in Edo County. The white snow decorated Mount Koya with silver. In addition, the geographical location of Mount Koya was relatively high, and the temperature on the mountain was more than 10 degrees lower than that on the flat ground, which was particularly cold. Because of such heavy snow, Mount Koya had been closed early. When Zhou Qin went up the mountain, she found that there were few people in the huge Mount Koya. Only a few monks in brown monk robes and yellow bamboo hats were walking slowly at the foot of Mount Koya. Zhou Qin looked at them and saw that these people were holding heavy vajra pestles. Although the weather was cold, they were all barefoot and wearing straw sandals, walking in the snow. The vajra in the hands of these monks was surprisingly long, about 1.6 meters high. There was a copper ring hanging on one end of the vajra. Every time the monk took a step, the copper ring on the vajra would make a fixed crisp sound. This sound echoed in the empty and gloomy Mount Koya, which was particularly ethereal and mysterious. These monks were like monks patrolling the mountain. When they saw Zhou Qin at a glance, they walked straight over. The leading monk formed a palm with one hand, saluted, and said a few words in Japanese. Zhou Qin's English was excellent, but she couldn't understand Japanese. She looked reserved and said in Chinese with a hint of sarcasm, "I have something to ask your Lord Masako Tachibana." The leading monk was stunned for a moment, as if he hadn't expected that the woman in front of him was not a Japanese. He turned his head and glanced at a monk behind him. Then a monk looked at Zhou Qin strangely. He stepped forward, leaning on the Vajra pestle in one hand and saluted with the other. He said in standard Chinese, "Benefactor, I think you are mistaken. There is no Masako Tachibana here. Moreover, everyone is equal in front of Buddha. How can there be such a thing as an adult or a lowly person?" Japanese Buddhism originated in China and was deeply influenced by Chinese Buddhism. Most of the scriptures collected in many Japanese temples were original works in Chinese, and some of them even had bilingual translations in Chinese and Japanese. In the past, if one wanted to become a real eminent monk in Japan, it was impossible not to know Chinese. In addition, Mount Koya was a famous tourist attraction. Every year, a large number of Chinese tourists came to enjoy it, so there were many monks in the temple who were good at Chinese. Zhou Qin even felt that the Japanese monks' Chinese was more fluent than many Chinese people's. However, the other party actually denied the existence of Masako Tachibana. Zhou Qin couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She asked, "Aren't you monks from Kangabuji Temple?" The monk smiled and said, "This is Kangabuji Temple and we are all monks here. But today, because of the heavy snow, Mount Koya has been closed. If you want to go sightseeing, I'm afraid you will be disappointed today." Only then did Zhou Qin understand that because she had restrained her qi all the way here, the other party had regarded her as an ordinary person, so he wanted to ask her to leave. Zhou Qin smiled slightly. She glanced at the Vajra pestle in the monk's hand and said, "How long is the Vajra pestle in your hand? 16 fingers? 20 fingers? One end of your Vajra pestle is in the shape of a ring drum, and the other end is in the shape of a triangular point. In the middle of the Vajra pestle, there are 3 Buddha statues as handles. One Buddha statue is smiling, one is angry, and the other is scolding. Hey, if I'm not mistaken, this should be the Vajra pestle that is specially used to subdue demons and defend the Tao, right?" The monk looked surprised. He looked at Zhou Qin carefully and asked in confusion, "How do you know this?" Zhou Qin laughed. She touched her waist with her hand, and a silver light flashed quickly in front of her. Chiwa instantly appeared in front of her and floated in the air. Under the reflection of the pure white snow, this chainsaw Vajra chakram appeared particularly stunning. Its entire body was emitting a dazzling silver light, and the exquisite patterns engraved on its surface were surging with waves of silver ripples, looking magnificent and magnificent. Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Because I also have such a treasure to subdue demons and defend the Tao." Only then did the monk realize that the other party was also a cultivator. His face suddenly changed and he asked in a deep voice, "Who the hell are you?" The other monks around the monk also slowly dispersed with vigilant expressions. They quietly surrounded Zhou Qin in the middle, eyeing her covetously. Zhou Qin knew that she was alone and weak, so she definitely couldn't fight with them. After all, this was the Xinyan Tantrism, and it was not a place to play. If she fought with them, she would not only humiliate herself, but the most embarrassing thing was that Li Jiandong would also come to save her. That would be a great shame. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and waved her hand. Chiwa instantly flew into the colorful brocade pouch around her waist. She said with a smile, "My name is Zhou Qin. I want to see your goddess Masako Tachibana." The monk's face was as dark as water. He said, "How can you see Masako Tachibana whenever you want?" Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. "Just now you said that everyone is equal in front of Buddha, but now you keep saying that Masako Tachibana is long and Masako Tachibana is short. Since everyone is equal, why can't I see her?" The monk's face changed. He put the Vajra in his hand on the snow and shouted coldly, "What a sharp-tongued woman. Are you here to make trouble for us in Mount Koya?" The surrounding monks also stopped the Vajra in their hands. The ring-shaped copper rings at the top of the pestle collided with each other, making an ear-piercing bell sound. The surrounding air shook, revealing a sharp killing intent. Zhou Qin glanced at them and said with a sneer, "I think you've made a mistake. It's your Lord Masako Tachibana who begged to see me. It's not that I want to see her." As the head of the Masako family, although she was not a member of the Xinyan Tantrism, she was the great minister of the Xinyan Tantrism. Moreover, the Masako family had a very close relationship with the great monks of all generations. Although strictly speaking, the people of the Masako family were not cultivators of the Xinyan Tantrism, they were women who held great power and were highly respected in the Xinyan Tantrism. In Japan, a world where men were superior to women and the upper and lower classes were extremely strict, the Masako family was a rare power and strength among Japanese women. Even after the Masako family and the great monks of Mount Koya merged for several generations, The cultivators of the Xinyan Tantrism had begun to respect and worship the people of the Masako family as the guardians of the Xinyan Tantrism. When the monk heard Zhou Qin's words, he was immediately furious and shouted, "How dare you? How dare you be disrespectful to Masako Tachibana?" He raised the vajra in his hand, pointed to the foot of the mountain, and shouted, "Please leave immediately or don't blame us for being rude." Zhou Qin was not angry but laughed. She glanced at the monk and sneered, "You want me to leave? Well, don't regret it later." With that she turned her head and left. When the other monks saw her leave, they did not stop her, but stared at her back vigilantly. When the monk who could speak Chinese saw Zhou Qin leave, he was stunned for a moment and looked suspicious. Soon, he turned his head and whispered a few words to the leading monk in Japanese. The leading monk thought for a moment. He whispered a few words to the monk who could speak Chinese. Soon, the monk who could speak Chinese shouted at Zhou Qin's figure, "Please wait a minute." Zhou Qin turned her face and sneered. "What's wrong?" The monk walked up to Zhou Qin and bowed, saying, "If you are really the guest of Masako Tachibana, please tell me your name." Zhou Qin smiled and turned around. "Go and tell Masako Tachibana that Li Jiandong, whom she wants to see, is here." The monk's face became more and more confused, but he did not dare to be careless. He turned around and whispered a few words to the leading monk, then quickly ran to the Kangabuji temple on the mountain. Zhou Qinying stood in the snow. After waiting for about 10 minutes, the monk rushed all the way over. He formed a palm with one hand, bowed respectfully and said, "It turns out to be Jinren Li. Please come in, come in." Zhou Qin saw that they thought of her as Li Jiandong, but she didn't say anything. She smiled and walked inside. After taking a few steps, she came to the entrance of Kangabuji temple. There were yellow shrines in front of the gates on both sides, and there was a wooden bucket filled with water in the shrine. Zhou Qin walked up the stone steps at the entrance, only to see ancient trees towering into the sky on both sides. The shade of the trees was dense, as if she had entered another world. What surprised her most was that wherever she went, the two sides of the stone steps would automatically light up with a white light, like countless white paper lanterns hanging in the forest. Although it was daytime, Zhou Qin still felt a strong light shrouding her, giving her an inexplicable feeling, as if she was stepping into the temple fairyland. Just as Zhou Qin was about to take a step forward, she suddenly saw Li Jiandong standing not far away and looking at her with a smile, as if he had been waiting for her here for a long time. Zhou Qin was shocked and subconsciously shouted, "Master? Why are you here? When did you get here?" "You." Li Jiandong walked up to Zhou Qin with a gentle smile on his face. He said softly, "I was worried about you, so I followed you." Zhou Qin felt warm in her heart and said with a smile, "I'm fine. I have an official background. They don't dare to do anything to me. But Master, you are here now. Aren't you afraid that they will detain you?" Li Jiandong walked up to Zhou Qin, gently took her hand and said with a smile, "Compared to myself, I am more concerned about your safety." Zhou Qin's heart suddenly started pounding. She couldn't believe that Li Jiandong would say such a thing to her at this time. Although Li Jiandong had shown her warmth and gentleness before, it was more under special circumstances. Although Zhou Qin could keenly sense that Li Jiandong did have a vague affection for her, he always stuck to that line and treated her with courtesy. The scene in front of her was a scene that Zhou Qin had repeatedly dreamed of night after night. It was a scene that she had been thinking about day and night. His arrival was so sudden and so surprising. Zhou Qin looked at Li Jiandong in a daze. Her heart was so happy that it seemed to explode, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. Li Jiandong seemed to know what Zhou Qin was thinking. He reached out to hold her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Then he lowered his head and kissed her fragrant lips. Zhou Qin only felt that her whole body was soft and hot. She subconsciously reached out her hand to block Li Jiandong's mouth and asked in a daze, "What about Su Chan?" However, Li Jiandong smiled slightly and said, "Actually, you are the one I love the most." Zhou Qin's whole body suddenly trembled. Her body, which had been trembling with excitement, gradually calmed down, and the ecstasy in her eyes slowly subsided. She pushed Li Yundong away and her voice became a little cold. She said slowly, "The Li Yundong I know is the most affectionate and righteous man in the world. He would never say such a thing. Who the hell are you?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.